Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Cameron Reigle.
And Rare's website, rare.co.uk, is turning 25. It's actually Sunday, May 14th was its actual 25th anniversary when it first went live. And if you're not familiar with Rare's website, you might be wondering why we're discussing its anniversary on the Kongversation at all. I mean, have we really run out of nostalgia to mine? But if you were online and active in Rare fandom from May 1998 through, some point through the buyout era, Rare's classic website, the one helmed by Lee Loveday, and that he affectionately named Rareware, the pun being Rareware, as in W-H-E-R-E, Rareware, as opposed to Rareware, W-A-R-E, their branding from 1994 to 2003. It was just as important to Rare's story as any game they released, I would argue, because not only did it give Rare a way to communicate with their fans around the world. I call Lee Loveday the mouth of Stamper because he is just like that dude from Lord of the Rings who meets them outside of Mordor. He basically communicated all of the company's messaging at that point in time via Rareware. And it gave us inklings of what Rare was working on long before Nintendo and then Microsoft would officially announce it. We knew about Donkey Kong 64. We didn't know it was going to be called that, but we knew about Donkey Kong 64 months before Nintendo revealed it. Because Lee just casually mentioned it. Oh yeah, of course they're working on Donkey Kong. Yeah. And if you read Rareware, you would know what was up. And it was not just that. It wasn't just, we're getting scoops before Nintendo's press releases, before the journalists get them. It wasn't just that, but it was also just the way Lee would interact with fans in a very personable, irreverent manner. And you would also, if you're just coming in to learn more about the games, you would also get extra lore and story details you would not find in any instruction manual. Sometimes it would be joking and non-canonical, and other times there would be new clarifying information found within the pages on Rareware that you never got anywhere else. Dustin and I just mentioned this on our Character Witness Swanky Kong episode, how the whole reason why Swanky was barred from television after the events of Donkey Kong Country 2 came from Rareware. It came from Swanky's character bio on Rareware. And you don't get that anywhere else. And it was more official. It was more canonical because it was coming from Rare, rather than, say, Nintendo Power, who would just, make things up, or maybe not get the full picture.
It kind of gave this interesting air of casual authority, is what I would say Rareware was.
Casual authority, that's great. I know, we'll be talking a lot about Lee Loveday on this episode, because he was the mad genius behind their website up until very recently. And Lee has been a figure we've talked about quite a bit in our 10 plus years of the Kongversation. One of the most admired figures, I would say, out of the entire storied history at Rare. And, it probably makes him uncomfortable for us to talk about him in that lofty status, but it's true. And it's all because he was the person who was communicating with the fans every week for years. This is before social media. This is before everybody at Rare was on social media, and you could just tag them and talk with them, ask them a question. And so Lee really did sort of communicate the way Rare was perceived by the fans. He was the one responsible for how we saw everything. And, like, he would just give us, new canon. Oh, yeah, here's some canon for Bumper the Badger. And, eat shit, Pottermore. I mean, Rare did it first. Rare was talking. Thankfully, they never said, oh, yeah, the Kongs just shit on the floor. But, there's never that level of, like, what the hell are you doing? It was all... When it was clearly a joke, right?
And people would still take it seriously anyway, but then there'd usually be a clarification like we were telling a joke.
Right.
When he said, like, well, we made Banjo 3, it was hidden and grabbed by the ghoulies, but none of you played it.
Yeah. DK Vine probably wouldn't have adopted the tone we did as a website had Rareware not shown it was possible to be serious and reverential about games without taking them seriously and while being irreverent. You could do both. And, it obviously took us a long time to strike that balance just right. We were dumb teenagers just emulating what we saw Lee do, but it was very influential. And so on this episode, we honor and celebrate the legacy of Rareware. And it's going to be hard saying Rareware so many times while putting that little spin on it. Yeah, where. Yeah. Like I try to do that every now and then when I talk about it just in the course of a regular conversation because, it's just want I'm not talking about Rareware, the branding of the studio's games from 1994 to 2003. I'm talking about Rareware, the website. But doing that like I'm coughing up a hairball throughout this entire episode will be very, very aggravating. So I'm probably just going to call it Rareware, and you're just going to have to know I'm talking about the website.
It works for me because the alternate spelling Rareware, you gave the URL as rare.co.uk.
Yeah.
I still type in www.rareware.com.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it still redirects the WARE spelling.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it does. They've kept that one locked down. More on that later. Anyway, yeah, so I'm looking forward to this. This is an episode, Cameron, you and I have talked about doing for years, and we thought we would wait until the right moment. And there are different permutations of discussing Rareware that we can do in the future that we won't get into here. This is just more of a general celebration that we have yet to have here on the Kongversation. But before we get into it, I would like to quickly plug our Patreon, because DK Vine is on Patreon. It is how we keep the lights on. It is how we keep everything running, because, independent Donkey Kong journalism doesn't pay for itself. Oh no. And I want to thank all of our existing patrons. You really are wonderful. You help keep the dream alive. I was crunching the numbers, Cameron, and I realized if we could get to $2,000 a month for our Patreon, then I can fully devote all of my energies to DK Vine. Not just keeping the lights on. We would own the damn power plant. So I think that's going to be my goal, my drive is to get to $2,000 a month from our patrons, because then we can really start expanding DK Vine in ways that we've only dreamed of before. So is this a pledge drive? I don't know. You can think of it like that. You're not going to get a tote bag, but you will get more great DK Vine content if we hit it. So be sure to check us out at dkvine.com/Patreon or patreon.com/DKVine. Now, Patreon is the main way we keep things running here, but we are also hawking t-shirts on TeePublic. That's right, that makes up a very, very small profit margin for us, but hey, we got some great designs on TeePublic at the moment, and I would say that our Kong College shirt, which you can find at dkvine.com/merchandise, or by searching DKVine on TeePublic. Our Con College shirt titled Old School is the perfect gift for the grad in your life this graduation season. Why get them a Dr. Seuss picture book? Oh, the places you'll go. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you'll go so many places. There's no opportunities unless you're a boomer. Get them a Con College shirt, and then they can have a laugh and have a comfortable shirt to wear. Yeah, the Dr. Seuss book will just gather dust. Don't do that. Get them a t-shirt. DK Vine, TeePublic. And also, we are on Twitch at twitch.tv/DKVine. We've just hit affiliate status, and we're trying to grow our brand on Twitch by streaming DKU games every week. So if you like our brand of insight and analysis, you'll love it as we actually play the video games. So check us out on Twitch. All right, Cameron, we're going to talk about Rare's website today. Rareware, that's the last time I'll do that, launched on May 14th, 1998. And the only way we know that is it's in the update section. And the only way we know that is you can still access the oldest eras of the site on Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine. It's not guaranteed to work. Not every page will function. A lot of the images don't work anymore, but you can still sort of navigate your way around, especially if you just go all the way back to the oldest snapshot in time, which is later in May 1998.
Thankfully, a lot of the images that are broken, you can tell from context what they are because they proliferated throughout the rest of the internet.
Yes, right. Like, most of the images from Rareware during this time were preserved by many resources like DKVine, DKC Atlas, Rare Gamer, Super Mario Wiki. Like, a lot of these images are out there, so
there's also a bit of irony. I mean, to clarify, even though we are like constantly referring to this as Rareware with an H, this earliest iteration of the site is the only one to actually call it that.
Right.
In other words, in other phases, it's just Rare's official website.
And I mean, partially, they retired the Rare WARE branding in 2003, right before Grab by the Ghoulies launched. Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge for the GBA was the last game to have that branding. And we don't even use it on DKVine. I know it's common for people to still refer to the studio as Rareware, refer to the games as Rareware games, but we refer to it as Rare because that's what actually the studio has always been. Rareware was just very, very evocative branding that really lodged in the brains of a generation. So,
and you know how we know that distinction, Hyle?
I read about it on Rareware. Did I write in about this? So here's my biggest problem with Rareware is I wrote in all the time to Scribes, the letter column.
Yeah, you were functionally a character in Scribes. You didn't just write in, people wrote in about you.
Yeah, I know. I was very clearly waving my freak flag high way back then, even, but I wrote in about everything, like mostly related to the DKU. Like, I don't think I wrote in about Perfect Dark, but I wrote in, I had a lot of questions, because, oh my God, I 4 years of hyper intensive fandom for this studio, and now I can just directly interact with somebody from the studio. Oh my God. So I remember I did write in and ask about it. I don't know if it was my letter that resolved this. And sometimes Lee would just write back to me. He wouldn't even run it in Scribes. He would just reply to me because he was like, all right, I'm just going to give you the answer here. We don't need to make this your contribution to Scribes this month. But I have a feeling like I wrote in about this and I was like, hey, you refer to yourself as just Rare quite a bit. And I get that, but is Rareware what you're actually called? And Lee was like, Rareware is the name of the games. It's what we call the games. We make Rareware, but we are Rare Limited. And that stuck with me, especially once we hit 2003 and they did retire the Rareware branding. But, yeah, now it's kind of like, I don't know, a stickling point for me because so many people use Rareware in this derogatory way when referring to anything post Nintendo that they did, like, or they just call it Rareware, like they haven't paid attention to the studio since 2003. So I'm like, no, it's Rare. It's always been Rare. I love that logo as much as anybody else. I have lots of clothing with that logo on it. I have the big pillow of that logo, but it's Rare, just Rare. It's just Rare. But, yeah, the Rareware name for the site, they retired that, like, what was it, 2001?
Yeah, I think it was, well, we'll get to it, but, the next revision of the site was 2001, yeah. Like mid 2001.
Yeah, so it was even before we had any notion that they might be leaving Nintendo. I know the rumors really kicked in late 2001. But yeah, it was the earliest version of the site you would think would be lost to time, but it's probably the best preserved version of the site on the Wayback Machine.
Yeah, the irony is, it's the best preserved, probably, or at least one of the best preserved, because it's from such an early age of the internet that the code is basic enough that it's not bursting apart at the seams, because it is not. Future iterations of Rare's website are rooted in the time they were designed, so they are playing with the latest toys.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those toys have been depreciated over the years.
Yeah. And it was funny because when Rareware first launched in May 1998, Lee was very proud that you don't need any fancy plugins to read our website. You know, it's just HTML. And of course that fell by the wayside as the years went along and more pressures to have a very modern corporate looking website grew, especially, after they were purchased by a major corporation.
And that said, I'd say Rareware still had a very clean look to it. This is not the Space Jam website we're talking about.
No. I mean, it was very basic, very simple, but elegant. And it just had wonderful navigation. It had that famous banner on the top and the bottom with the spinning Rareware logo, the Rareware slab, and it would just be spinning icons, and you can always click on those to get yourself home. But yeah, there's something to be said for just very simple, very practical HTML web design. I love it. I mean, even DK Vine isn't this simple anymore, and but I don't know, I will always have a soft spot for a well-designed, and they're not like Space Jam or vintage GeoCities websites, but just something that looks professional and gets the job done without any extra razzmatazz, And that's what Rareware was, and it was always just very nice, especially in the age of dial-up. I can't stress this enough, how when you were on a dial-up modem browsing the internet, you didn't want anything that would take forever to load. And it was always very, very quick getting around Rareware and getting around the different pages. And you could devote an entire afternoon just reading the site. And it felt almost instantaneous, which back in that day, a lot of websites weren't.
I certainly appreciated it. I don't think I had high-speed internet at home until 2008.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's yeah.
It wasn't good.
No,
wasn't good.
I can't imagine it was. I think it was around 2003 for me, maybe. It was still, I felt relatively late, especially because, all my friends made fun of me for it. But once I got just on high-speed internet, you could actually stay online. It wasn't this whole thing where, oh, you're online, you're taking up the phone lines. What if somebody needs to call us? What if there's an emergency? Get off the internet. And you have to log off, and then you're not online anymore. And then once you get on high-speed internet, once you're not on dial-up, you're like, wait, I can just be online at all times? This seems like it would be bad for my mental health, but okay. And of course, now we're online in our pockets, we're just carrying around the internet with us. We're never away from it. But yeah, that was a big deal back then for sure. So when we discuss Rareware, the original website, I feel like, is the nucleus of it. It's the epicenter of everything. The further in time we go, towards the present day, the further away we get from the heart of the website as we know and celebrate it. And I wouldn't say like, oh, it was at its best when it first launched, because that's, I'm sure there are people who say that about DK Vine. Oh, I liked it back in the year 2000, when you had a letters column, which was just us ripping off Scribes. And, I'm like, well, that sucked back then because we were just dumb teenagers. And like, yeah, I like that. Okay. But for me, like, it was at its truest spirit before they started modernizing it. And especially like once it had to meet all of these corporate quotas of what a website needed to be and be professional. But back when it was just Lee running it, and that's it. And it was his personal playpen. That is when it was truly Rareware.
I think it's also hard not to describe it in those terms, just because like a lot of the features and like main like banner stuff we remember about Rare's web presence was fully formed right out of the gate. Like, Scribes wasn't something that happened 5 years in. It was just there.
Yeah. And that was so enticing for me because I found the website in July 1998. So it'd been up for only like 2 months at that point, but it's felt so fully realized. It felt so fully fleshed out when I found it that I felt like I was a late adopter. I was like, oh, I can't believe this has been here all this time and I didn't know about it. I got in relatively quickly, but it still felt like there was years of content that I needed to catch up on in just that short amount of time. Like, I don't know how long it took Lee to actually get all these pages crafted, get all these concepts ready to go before he launched on May 14th of that year. But wow, well, once he did, it was overwhelming. Why don't we go through the more notable features of that original iteration of the website? Because I feel like we need to explain what the main like pillars of content on Rareware actually were before we get further away into the history. So, of course, the one that I think everybody lionizes and celebrates and really puts on a pedestal is Scribes, which was their monthly letter column where anybody could write in via email and you would occasionally get a genuine response from Lee, or Lee would ask a dev, an unnamed dev usually, the answer to your question. And at that point in time, it was the fastest way to interact with anybody at Rare. And it was always just entertaining because you never knew what people were going to ask. You never knew what revelations might come about. And you never knew, like, what asshole would write in and get absolutely obliterated by Lee. So it was always just a lot going on in Scribes. And, like, once I started writing in, of course, it was also thrilling for me to get into Scribes on a regular basis. Like, I think I was in most months. I think I had the winning streak as far as appearing in Scribes for the longest time.
It's interesting to go back through the Scribes records and just like play a look and find of like how many of these people are still in these circles today. Like, you were a regular, Chris Alcock was a regular, Chad would show up, Dark Mark would show up.
Yeah. It really was a very fast way to sort of build up this notion of a Rare fan community. This was kind of the early goings of it. Obviously, there were Rare fan sites online and there were like news groups and stuff, but the modern like Rare fan community as we know it, just like the core Rare fan community. I'm not even talking about like Sea of Thieves fan communities or anything, or, you know, popular streamers or anything nowadays, but just what is thought of as the online Rare fan community really had its origins in this nebula that was Scribes, where people would start recognizing each other and then we would start our own websites and people would, you know, become staff writers for those websites and we would just start interacting with each other. And, you know, the amount of people on Scribes that eventually became staffers for DK Vine throughout the years, it's quite a bit. I mean, that's where we first learned of Ben, Aussie Ben, who was our first, I guess you could call it outside hire on DK Vine. Wouldn't be the last, obviously, but yeah, in that original like era of DK Vine, when it was just me and Chad, and then we brought in somebody else, and it was Ben, and we knew of Ben from Scribes. So it really was a great recruiting tool when you wanted to sort of pepper the ranks of your output.
Yeah, it's when you want to recruit people for your website, it's a resume.
Yeah. Scribes was really just what, like when there wasn't a particular game you wanted new information on. I mean, and during this era there always was, but it was just as exciting to wait out that month's installment of Scribes. Like, you would get on AOL or whatever every afternoon after school, and you would be like, oh, you know, we're due with Scribes any day now. Will today be the day we get Scribes? And you would go immediately to Rareware and check it out. And yeah, I mean, like I said, Scribes was basically the hub of everything on Rareware, and I think it speaks volumes that out of all of these early features on the website, Scribes is the one that stuck around the longest as a concept. I mean, it stuck around into the 2010s, right? This isn't just like this archaic thing from the glory days of the Rare Nintendo partnership. I mean, this stuck around like into the Kinect Sports era of Rare.
Yeah, it's just like an institution, and like to this day, like a lot of fans, you say Scribes, they know what you mean.
Yeah, there are online archives of Scribes, just devoted to Scribes, and I think that really just says it all. Like, there are people out there who are like all about games preservation, and then there are people who want to preserve renders and artwork from the games that may, you know, fallen by the wayside, especially from Rare for Nintendo. You know, a lot of that stuff you really can't find in high quality. And then you got people who are preserving the letters column on Rare's website because it meant so much. And it was such an illuminating source. Like I said, we learned about Donkey Kong 64 that it was actually in development. Like, rumors aside, because it was a game that had been rumored in some form or another since late 1995. It wasn't even in development then, but the rumor mill said it was. But that we actually got it confirmed that, yes, of course, we're making Donkey Kong for the N64. Why wouldn't we?
Conversely, it's really funny to go back through both the archives of Scribes and Ask Uncle Tusk and see how many times Lee very bluntly outlined we're not working on Killer Instinct 3.
Yeah. Yeah, and that kind of, like, upfront nature to everything was really like unique. I mean, not just for its time, even today. Like, you would basically know right away, are you secretly working on a game? No, we're not. And they would be shut down. I mean, there would always be new people writing in who hadn't seen that, but
Yeah, I mean, the two flavors of comment when you ask an official channel, are you working on unannounced thing, are no or no comment, which implicitly means yes, so a lot of people don't even say no comment.
Right. And like Lee was very upfront, like, no, Killer Instinct 3 is not in the works. Donkey Kong 64? Yeah.
Of course, it's Donkey Kong. Why not?
Right. So that was always so refreshing. And of course, this would kind of fly under the radar. Like, I don't think even sites like IGN really mind Scribes for stories. Like, in this day and age, IGN has mined the Kongversation for clickbaity headlines in the past. But back then, like, you would get all of this just amazing revelation after revelation, all of these details, and the big news sites would kind of ignore it, and it would just be our little secret between us and Rare. It was weird in retrospect.
Yeah, it's really this, also just this vividness of we'd get a straight answer on like a development question being asked about Banjo-Kazooie because he could just walk over and ask somebody.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are times when they said stuff they probably weren't supposed to say. And then, in hindsight, looking back, there were things they were still dodgy about. It's not like we got a full open and shut, like, insight into development, like the whole drama around Stop and Swap, for example, when Banjo-Tooie came out and there was no actual connection between it and Banjo-Kazooie, and they just had this sort of make good ice key and question mark eggs in these N64 cartridges in the game, and we were like, okay, but where's the real connection? Like, how do you get the real ice key? And like, Lee never got into the details then that we now know, thanks to Paul Makachek, years after the fact. Like, he never got into, Nintendo shut this down, because, you don't want to upset Nintendo. And so there were times when they did play nice and not actually, like, get into everything. But, yeah, it's just amazing, like, how plugged in we felt as a fan community. And, of course, we were kept at arm's length. It was Lee basically acting as sort of the filter for everything going both ways.
And even when you were kept at arm's length and not totally let in on something, you usually get a fun, pithy response about it.
Yeah, and that was always fun, too. I know, like, the other year, I tagged Lee in something on social media, just lauding him, as I occasionally like to do. I don't do it too often because I know it probably makes him uncomfortable, but, I was feeling nostalgic, and I was like, hey, Rareware, the website was great. And, he said something like along the lines of I looking back, I might regret the tone I took with some people. Personally, I loved when he would be snarky with me. I'd be like, oh, you. it always felt in good nature. Like, especially, like, occasionally people would write it who would be complete and utter assholes, and they deserved a good public thrashing. But, you could usually tell when he was just being dryly sarcastic with you.
It's an impressive tightrope to walk, I think, to be, like, sardonic but not cruel.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But, Scribes was the epicenter of everything. But there was so much more to the website than just Scribes. There were other ways we could actually write in and interact with Rare. And probably the biggest way that Lee sort of ceded control at the time was via an irregular feature called the Tepid Seat. Not the hot seat, the Tepid Seat.
I'm embarrassed how long it took me to get that was a pun on hot seat.
Oh, yeah, I didn't understand it at first either. There were a lot of learning curves with Lee's writing because I was a sheltered American youth who didn't really have much exposure, outside of my home country at the time. And so there are a lot of Britishisms, Englishisms, UKisms that just went over my head. Or I would misinterpret the meaning, and occasionally, eventually I would get caught up to speed. But even like stuff like the tepid seat, which should be a very obvious pun on hot seat. It's not the hot seat. It's tepid. It's lukewarm. I didn't get that right away. It took me a while.
Also, like it's kind of evocative of another key component of Rare's web presence, and also just Lee's writing in general, which is dripping with self-deprecation.
Yes, exactly. Because these would be questions that would be solicited, and then, I guess, filtered down to a team at Rare for a specific game. So generally, after a game comes out, there would be a period of time where then Lee would open up the tepid seat for a particular game. Okay, here's your hard-hitting questions. Like, we're just going to bypass Scribes and that whole routine. We're just going to take these questions directly to the team. And of course, Lee would cultivate the ones he felt were best and then bring them to the team. And then the team would answer. And we would get some insight. And, nowadays people would just tag Greg Mails or whatever, ask him to come on their podcast, But back then, when the stampers were so secretive, and we didn't even know the full names of a lot of the devs because they wouldn't even give their full names in the credits for fear of other studios poaching them. I don't really agree with that, Chris and Tim Stamper, but all right.
It's an ugly practice that's around the industry. Back then, it's not great.
Yeah, but anyway, so we would even know like the full identity of a lot of these people behind the games, but yeah, Lee would bring them these questions and we would get answers. And so that was the tepid seat.
And tepid seat, I think, is one of the features in that, in a way, got more fascinating the longer it ran because, like, yes, everybody wants to get answers about Banjo-Kazooie and GoldenEye, but, like, the later into the Rare's career, like, they weren't interviewed very often about Grab by the Ghoulies to tell these sort of development stories. People don't bring Greg Mails and Steve Malpass onto their podcasts to talk about Grab by the Ghoulies for 3 hours.
Incidentally, Greg Mails and Steve Malpass, if you would like to come on the conversation and talk about Grab by the Ghoulies for 3 hours, I would be all for that. 20th anniversary is coming up. You know how to reach me.
But yeah, thanks to that, we have stories about and answered questions about working on Grab by the Ghoulies. We have Q&A with the Rare handheld team, Jet Force Gemini team, the Cameo. Mm-hmm. Like it just kind of became this neat repository for information you weren't really going to find anywhere else.
Exactly. Yeah. Honestly, like for me, like the tepid seat was interesting. I wrote in a few times, but I don't know, like for me, like Scribes was really where my interests lie. I guess because I just didn't have enough faith in myself to ask a really good question of the teams. And with the Lee, I knew what to expect. So for me, that was just like, I have social anxiety to a degree. I didn't realize it at the time, but I do. So for me, like, once I felt like Lee was a fun presence to interact with, I sometimes just wanted to leave it at that. Like, I didn't want to hassle anyone else, even if Lee was the one doing the filtering through. Like, it's like, I don't want to concern them with my questions. They're stupid, but I don't mind asking Lee and Scribes some other time, So the tepid seat, it didn't really pull me in like the others, but it was always fun to read once they were published.
You say you had social anxiety. At least you wrote in. I never wrote into Scribes because I just was too terrified to, or didn't have anything to ask. I did write into Rare once. More on that later.
So we talk about Scribes being the most reverential thing from the website, but it's probably not the most lasting influence the website has had on the broader Rare fandom or just video games in general, because that came in the form of a fairly innocuous thing. You wouldn't expect this aspect of the site to be as impactful as it was, but because of the nature of how Lee presented it, it would have great ramifications for Rare, the shared Rare universe, the Donkey Kong universe. It was the site survey section. The site survey section was just a forum where you could give feedback on the site.
And you say like site survey stuff section. Well, what's special about that?
So, and this is just I think the sense of humor that Lee had, that this kind of cheekiness where I can't just have a feedback section for the site. I need to make it fun. I need to make it engaging. I need to entice and delight and stoke the fires of imagination. So I'm going to have a mascot for the site survey section. Some person holding a clipboard getting your feedback. And I'm going to make him as shit as possible. I'm going to put the least amount of effort into this character.
I believe Lee drew him in MS Paint, if I'm not mistaken.
It looks like it was drawn in MS Paint, and it was this very janky looking, half-nude man, wearing nothing but his underpants and a bowler hat, named Mr. Pants the Survey Man. And, of course, anybody who listens in on the Kongversation on a regular basis or has read DK Vine will know of Mr. Pants. We have not let you forget about Mr. Pants, because Mr. Pants, of course, would go on to become a canonical Rare character and a part of the DKU. And of course, once he did that, like, his design was polished up a little bit. When I say polished up, don't worry, he still looks like garbage.
Here, because I have some notes pulled up, I actually have a response from Lee when somebody wrote into Scribes asking who Mr. Pants was.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Mr. Pants is a character I, quote, produced in about 30 seconds one day, when it became obvious that none of our artists had the spare time to put together a new render of an existing Rare character for the survey page. Since his international debut, many people have criticized Mr. Pants for being, quote, crap and, quote, badly drawn. They are correct.
What I love is Mr. Pants. This is something that went over my head as a kid. Like, pants is slang for crap, right? Like, he's a rubbish character, Mr. Pants, but he's also just in his underpants.
This also requires you to know the difference culturally between saying pants in the UK versus in the US.
Right. It would be what we called pants here would be trousers over there. So, yeah, you got this pasty, doughy Englishman in a bowler hat and a mustache with his nips out and proud. And, looking at this original MS Paint doodle of Mr. Pants with the clipboard that appeared on Rareware, I can't help but be drawn to the massive bulge that's on display. It's so loud, Cameron. I mean, how did I never notice this when I was a kid? How did I never just stare at this? I can't look away, Cameron. It's on our key art for YouTube and SoundCloud for this episode, and I just keep glancing at it. I'm like, yep, that's Mr. Pants' dick, all right.
I mean, I just took it as, like, this is a consequence of him being as flatly drawn as he is, that his Y-fronts just look like they were pressed on an ironing board, but yeah. So, of course, we'll talk a little bit more about Mr. Pants throughout this episode. Mr. Pants would
be the longest lasting influence in all of Rare when it comes to the impact this website had. But
I think we could genuinely do a spotlight episode on Mr. Pants. This character like grew into his own so much.
Grew into his own, developed a whole mythology around them that intertwines with the DKU. Like there's a whole region in the DKU called Pantsland, for Christ's sake. I love Mr. Pants, and my affection for Mr. Pants has only grown. Just like Mr. Pants grows, apparently. But yeah, like it all started in this very, very small way. And I'm sure Lee had no idea that his little joke of a character would eventually helm his own game. A game that not many people have played, granted, but still, like, he would go on to create a lasting Rare character. I mean, that's pretty impressive for a website from 1998. Well, speaking of characters, I would say aside from Mr. Pants, there's also another mascot of the early days of Rare's website that isn't really an original character. It's more of
an appropriated mascot.
Yeah, it's more of a new spin on an existing Rare IP. And it had the effect where I can't think of this character now without first thinking of the version from Rare's website. In fact, whenever we talk about Killer Instinct 2 or the modern day Killer Instinct 2013, I always inevitably refer to this character as Uncle Tusk rather than just Tusk, because to me, this character is Uncle Tusk. That's his name. And I'm like, oh, wait a second. That was just from the website. He's just Tusk. He's not actually a columnist that angrily responds to people.
We should probably, clarify exactly what this is. So, he's referred to on the site as Uncle Tusk because what Ask Uncle Tusk was on Rareware was Rare's spin on, the Agony Aunt column.
Yes.
Or, what you might know as, a Dear Abby column.
Yeah.
And an advice column.
Sure.
Where readers would write in about questions about Rare games, ostensibly kind of like their version of a tip line, but you would also get development questions as well, and the lines kind of blurred a little bit between the purposes of this and the purposes of Scribes a bit, but the key conceit of Uncle Tusk that made it stand on its own and made it so memorable was all of these questions that people wrote in asking for help with their, quote the page, Rare gaming problems. They were answered in character by Tusk from Killer Instinct 2, and because they were answered in character, there's not a lot to go on about Tusk in Killer Instinct 2, but he is a very Conan the Barbarian style archetype, big muscle-bound dude with a giant sword and a loincloth.
Yeah.
And so, because this column was run by him, Tusk's personality, he was boorish, rude, and actively antagonistic to his readership. So when people would write him in, he would just kind of roast them with insults, be generally rude to them, and occasionally threaten them with violence.
Which you could not get away with. Pretty much at any point online after, the turn of the millennium. This was a very narrow window where a studio could threaten its audience with violence and have it be played off for laughs. Of course, this is one of the things they retired first during the long history of Rare's website. But for a time, oh yes, you could have a Killer Instinct 2 character threaten you with bodily harm.
And to be clear, it was heightened. He would reference having he would reference sharpening his axe, or There's an offhand mention of him having something called the Big Stick of Good Behavior. Implied, like a baseball bat.
Right. Yeah. I never wrote into Uncle Tusk. I don't think I did. I was too intimidated by Uncle Tusk. Nor did I really ever want any game advice from Rare. I was always more interested in lore or, divining what the future might hold. I was not interested in hey, I can't get this one Jiggy in Banjo-Kazooie. Can you help me out? That wasn't what I used Rare's site for, so I never had the itch to write into Uncle Tusk. But I enjoyed reading Uncle Tusk. I wasn't the biggest Killer Instinct fan back in the day, so it was more just an amusing diversion to read this column and to see Lee as this barbarian character just going on.
I like you. It's completely colored the character for me, even though, obviously this wasn't referenced in KI2 because it came out before Uncle Tusk was a thing, and it's not really acknowledged in KI 2013 either. The closest thing I think we've got is Lee responding to a post about Tusk on Twitter saying he's got a beard now, that hipster.
Yeah, I when I said there were things that would inform the canon on Rare's website, I wasn't actually including Uncle Tusk because this was very clearly a sort of cheeky take on a character, but it still very much has informed my opinion of the character, so much so that now that Killer Instinct 2013 is recognized as being DKU, I look at him and I'm just like, yeah, I could see him. I could see him being this Uncle Tusk character, this advice giver, and just it's an obvious joke. If you're gonna take any Rare character from this era and do the Agony Ant column, and what would be the funniest take on that? And having it be the big Conan the Barbarian brute who just lives for violence. That's, yeah, of course, just, it's low-hanging fruit, but it's well worth picking.
And we there is a nugget of canonicity to him that I'm going to run with, which is one of the novelty loading screens in Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which unfortunately / fortunately go on. You can't read them in Rare Replay because the loading times are slim to nil in that game on modern hardware. One of them says if you're still because the loading screens give you hints in a rotation. One of them advises if you're still stuck, quote, time to follow Uncle Tusk's old adage and stop being so rubbish.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, maybe Tusk does refer to himself as Uncle Tusk at times, and of course there is all of this mythology around Uncle Tusk as well that you have appropriated for your cat in Sea of Thieves.
Yeah, do we want to detour and talk about the lore of Tusk? Since unlike Mr. Pants, I don't think he ever is going to get a spotlight episode.
No. So I think, yeah, now's the time if you want to talk about Sniffles.
All right. Well, so as a consequence of this Agony Ant column, we did get some information about Tusk sort of bleeding back into his responses, and some of this was goaded from the readership, basically asking a loaded question to get Lee to respond in character in a way that would reinforce or reject what they said. So here's just a selection of things we learned about Tusk. Him and Mr. Pants have an arrangement where Mr. Pants provides him his undergarments. He learned how to chop heads from playing Barbarian on the ZX Spectrum. His marriage to Maya is tense, and she might be cheating on him with TJ Combo. In a series of messages, we learned that she goes out for late-night workout sessions with TJ Combo and comes back at 3 a.m. exhausted. Anyway, the end of that arc in a follow-up letter was Tusk eventually says that she doesn't go to TJ Combo's gym anymore since it, quote, since it burned down. Ha ha ha.
Yeah. It's great. Like, and of course, like, I'm sure hardcore Killer Instinct fans, like over at KI Central or whatever, wouldn't pay any mind to this. But of course, like, now that we have this one Killer Instinct game in the DKU, we're like, yeah, okay, yeah, I can see this for sure. Yeah. And also it influences Tusk appearance in IDARP, that DKU classic. So you can definitely like have a little bit of is TJ Combo in IDARP? I forget. I know Tusk is.
Genuinely forget. I'll need to check that. I know that it's generally centered around the KI2 cast, but TJ Combo is in that.
Right.
But anyway, I'm burying the lead here. Maybe the most recurring bit to come out of Uncle Tusk was his pet cat, Sniffles.
Mm-hmm.
So, the context of Sniffles is, at one point, Tusk received a letter, and I'm pretty sure this... How this went about, I believe, is just one person got this idea and wrote this in. Tusk received a letter from the Hammerdale Veterinarian Hospital telling him that he needs to pick up his cat. It has been 14 and a half years. He owes over $4,000 in bills. And if Tusk does not come to pick him up within 24 hours, they are going to leave the cat at the county dump in a garbage bag.
Reputable institution.
And, the Tusk fed the story. We learned that Sniffles is a very sickly cat, implausibly geriatric. I'm 27 years old. Established in this very first response.
Uh-huh.
And very mucusy. Like, Tusk does not seem to want him back. And in light of this letter, Sniffles kind of became this, like, reader-fueled passa story.
Uh-huh, yeah.
Where he, through letters that people submitted, kind of went on this increasingly implausible series of misfortune/adventures. I'll just recount briefly all of the things that befell Sniffles that I could find my trawling through the archives of Uncle Tusk.
This is just what you could find. There may be more.
Right. So, he was sent to the dump in a garbage bag. The employees couldn't bring themselves to crush him in, quote, the garbage cruncher. So they sent him to the Falkland Islands to be incinerated by means of a nuclear bomb. That was followed by a letter describing that Sniffles had eaten the entire arsenal of armed test bombs and became a mutated giant cat capable of speech, expressing that he wanted revenge on Maya due to, quote, repeated kicks to the head during kittenhood, which was revealed in Tusk's response to have actually been him in a wig and bikini. He then stepped on a house and caused $1 septillion worth of damage to the Falkland Islands Museum. He was because Tusk didn't pay the damages for this, and Sniffles continued to wreak havoc, he was incarcerated and deemed to be put to death. But they tried to kill him via the electric chair, which only intensified his mutation, turning him into a 200-foot kaiju with extra limbs and telepathic powers. This was followed by a letter written from the perspective of Sniffles himself, now able to express his thoughts in English, and expressing he was picking up Swahili and had the goal of going to Africa. This is where he tells Tusk about him hearing that Maya was in America with TJ Combo, and that arrayed the radiation is apparently causing things to melt in his presence. Sniffles wrote in a second time, expressing that he wanted to come back home to Tusk. His feelings were hurt by people calling him a, quote, mutant kitty and a, quote, radioactive catastrophe. And as a, like, welcome home gift, a coming home gift for Tusk, he planned to come home and present him with Tip Tup and Cranky Kong captured in a plastic bag. And warning Tusk that, like, hey, you shouldn't touch me because you might get horribly sick. And then Tip Tup and Cranky would have to take over the letter writing column. To which Tusk responded that he should chuck Tip Tup and Cranky in a river and go stay with Aunt Gertie, who is, quote, off her head. Then Sniffles was found frozen in the Arctic by scientists in his last known whereabouts. Scientists attempted to clone him, not knowing what he was, resulting in about 24 Sniffles clones rampaging across the globe. A subsequent letter from Sniffles, Sniffles number 4, one of the clones, wrote in saying he seemed to be demutating back into a normal cat. Basically, the amount of things that had happened to him had just completely demolished his DNA. He'd already lost multiple limbs, eyes, the ability to speak Spanish, and asked if Tusk could prepare a freezing chamber for him. And then the final letter was Sniffles writing in saying he had stopped demutating and regained his full memory. He no longer needs a freezing chamber, but he's asked for fresh litter for the first time in 6 years. He is also still radioactive, has developed I-beams, and ate another recurring character in the Uncle Tusk column, Sean Williamson.
Now, who's Sean Williamson?
So, Sean Williamson was a real person who wrote into Uncle Tusk, and this is kind of the thing with all of Rare's website, is just you would have these running jokes that kind of got absorbed by the collective that was writing in, so they would just come up all the time.
Yeah.
Sean Williamson was a real person who wrote into Uncle Tusk for the purpose that Uncle Tusk was created for, to ask for game advice, asking for help bettering his clear times for archives in GoldenEye so he could unlock the invisibility cheat.
Yeah.
Saying the best he could manage was 4 minutes and 13 seconds. And then, partially because they'd already given, like, hints and tips for GoldenEye elsewhere on the site, Tusk roasted him for, quote, having a seriously crap time, and then proceeded to, in responses to the rest of the people who were writing in that iteration of Uncle Tusk, roasted him repeatedly throughout other answers, just bringing him up over and over again. And he became a running joke with the leadership, with the readership.
Uh-huh. Did he ever write in again?
Not that I could find.
So, like, you know, because, like you mentioned, like, a lot of people in Scribes would just become, like, characters, like me, you know, once upon a time. But, yeah, Sean Williamson became a character, a running joke at the very least. Poor guy just wrote it once. And, you know, but that's the kind of, not that I necessarily condone, like, taking a real person and their real name and making a joke out of them. Like, that's not something I would do nowadays. But back in the mindset of 1998, I totally get that. And that's the kind of thing that you just take something, like, very, very innocent, innocuous, and you snowball it into absurdity. And that's the kind of humor that I've always found endearing, is you take something relatively benign and you just keep at it until it's hit this ludicrous level that you can't even explain to any newcomers.
Yeah, I even found a response to a letter you wrote that mentioned Sean Williamson.
Oh, so I don't even remember half the stuff I wrote in about or the responses I got. It's all a blur.
Yeah, so I don't want to do too much verbatim letter reading from Scribes because, one, I think it just makes this an arduous episode, and two, I recommend people just look up the archives of these themselves.
And we'll probably do a Scribes episode in the future, honestly, so...
So, this is from April 29th, 1999.
Oh my god.
Dear Scribes, what is the present state of the pants industry in your Donkey Kong Country games? Both Donkey Kong and Diddy never wear pants. Neither does Dixie Kong and Cranky Kong. But for some reason, Funky Kong always wears pants. And Swanky Kong wore no pants in DKC2, but in DKC3, he wore the pants. Apparently, pants are not required in basic society for the video game community of Donkey Kong and pals, but can be worn if desired. But if so few apes wear pants, how can a pants maker stay in business on DK Island? They would surely go bankrupt by the end of their first year. Do the apes import the pants from somewhere else? And if so, what do they export in exchange for the pants? Please respond, because frankly, this has been bugging me.
So, can I just say, right now, Cameron, I was worried when you started reading a letter that I wrote in 1999 to Scribes. But right now I've got tears in my eyes because I am so proud of little baby me for asking the important questions.
This is a good letter.
Oh my god. Oh.
So, I'll read the response. Last month, Diddy's feces. This month, Swanky's pants. You're a sick man, Slush. But while I'm here, I suppose I may as well have a crack at it, ho-ho. For a start, Funky's a wicked surfer dude, so by default, he always has to be wearing stupid shorts. As for the others, I don't imagine they feel any particular everyday pant requirement. Wandering around semi-naked is a step up from most monkeys, really. Swanky was on tour in DKC3, so he probably threw a pair of pants on just in case he bumped into anyone of a more sensitive species. Don't know where the modest Kong Clan pant supply actually comes from, though. Perhaps they get them from the Kremlings, in return for sending them some of the less immediately useful members of their family over to work as slaves. You know, Thickly Kong, Dribbly Kong, Sean Williamson Kong, all that lot.
Oh my god, so that's where Sean Williamson Kong comes from. Because that's brought up every so often, and I'm like, I do not remember that joke. I do not know where that joke comes from. And then, okay, so it was in response to me. Oh, okay. I got it now. I remember. Thanks, Lee. So just to follow up on Lee's response to my question from 24 years ago, I actually have an answer to 1999 Hyle from 2023 Hyle. So we do know that there are two sources for underpants in the Rare Archipelago. This was established in Banjo-Tooie. Grunty Industries makes underpants, and they're a big supplier. However, I would say probably the most predominant supplier of pants is, in fact, Mr. Pants. He's a model for pants, yes, but he's also a manufacturer. And Mr. Pants pants are probably the most popular pants in the Rare Archipelago. I know I, being an American in 1999, was talking about pants as in trousers, but I'm just talking about underpants at this point. Anyway, we see in Yooka-Laylee, a Platonic game that still acknowledges the shared canonicity of all of this. We see that Yuka has a catalog from what is implied to be Mr. Pants Company. So, there you go. Me from 24 years ago. I hope that helped. And now I really want to make Sean Williamson Kong canon in some way. Like, I already made Pepito Kong somewhat canon in Sea of Thieves.
He's got to be in the Mario movie somewhere.
Yeah, that's the bouncer that meets them. Cameron, your cat in Sea of Thieves is Sniffles. And you've worked it out in your head so it's still canon with everything that happened to Sniffles. in Ask Uncle Tusk.
Yeah. This is why I was able to just track down all of these mentions of Sniffles, because when Rare added cats as a pet you could buy in the game, like, because a lot of people had already been doing, I mean, I know how we run in our circles, we'd already been doing cheeky references to things. Like, you had already got Pepito Kong down on lock.
Yeah.
I thought, like, I want to do something similarly just super indulgent. So when they added cats, I got the idea, I'm going to put a cap on this running gag. I'm going to keep it going one more time and get a cat in game and name it Sniffles. And I'm going to go back and cross-reference all this lore written about Sniffles and make sure this makes sense. And luckily for me, the last few bits implied Sniffles was returning to plausibly a normal-looking cat. So I went into the pet store, picked a cat that I thought looked plausibly like geriatric and grumpy enough to be Sniffles, which was I'm trying to remember the type of cat that it was. Ragamuffin. Yeah, Ragamuffin. It's like a graying cat that has, like, essentially has a mustache and angry eyebrows, like, in its fur pattern. And I look at that and I think, okay, that's Sniffles.
Yeah.
So I bought that cat, named it Sniffles, and I tweeted at Rare in character as my pirate a response, which I didn't get a response to this tweet, but I feel like it's just, well, to make it a Sniffle, part of the Sniffles arc, you have to put it in writing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I wrote down. Dear Uncle Tusk, we believe we've acquired your cat through a crooked merchant. As we can't find you, the hardy critter now resides aboard our pirate vessel. Do find us sometime in the next few centuries if you'd like him back. Ragin' Reigle of the Dreadfully Evil.
Yeah.
And I even made sure that in-game, I bought Sniffles through the Merchant Alliance shopkeeper Ebenezer, who is framed in-game as one of the more unscrupulous merchants. He's the one who sold an invisible parrot.
Yep. Good job, Cameron. I feel like once pets were added to the game, we all had to get our self-indulgent canon inserts in there somehow. Like, you did Sniffles. You made this cat character from the Uncle Tusk column. I did Pepito Kong, this joke Kong example on DK Vine, but made him a like semi-canonical Kong, you know, like, oh, here we go. Here he is. Shane, our friend Shane Marchus, introduced a parrot and named it Hyle to force the canon that my pirate ancestor first learned of the name Hyle from this parrot. Ergo, I am named after a parrot. So yeah, I feel like we're all in the same wavelength, just different permutations of it. Like, how can we most impact the shared universe through our pets? Like, we all have the same illness, the same sickness, and I feel like it's all a result of reading this crap in our youth.
It absolutely is.
So those were the big, I think, reoccurring sections on Rare's website, but the bulk of the website was actually stuff like their games pages, where you could just, like I said, devote an entire afternoon or more just going through all of the back pages, the back matter of the website.
This, I think, it's the kind of stuff you would come to the website for if you weren't in on the bit.
Yes. I think once you were a regular and you were part of the in crowd that would get the jokes and the humor, once you were an addict, it was the other stuff that kept you coming back. But this is the stuff that really made you drop your jaw at first and be like, whoa, they have like a page for everything on this website. This is amazing. And like, this is where I learned about Rare, like the actual history of Rare, because up until this point, I didn't know exactly, what their story was. Like, eventually I would, play a game and it'd be like, whoa, like Rare did this game? This old game on the NES? Rare did this? Whoa, Rare was behind Battletoads? How did I not know this? But this is where it would all be shored up and I would get like my full education in all things Rare.
And like, I can't underline this enough for our readership who might not remember a simpler time, or listenership who might not remember a simpler time. I'm getting it screwed up because we're talking about a website. This was an age before you could just look this up on Wikipedia.
There was no Wikipedia. There was no YouTube. There was no social media. So basically, you relied on websites that other people built. And I know that doesn't sound convenient. That doesn't sound like in this instant information age where we can just pull out a phone from our pockets and be like, oh, there's the answer. That's the historical fact I was looking for. Back then, you had to do the research and it had to be provided to you. And this was just an invaluable resource of all things Rare. And it really did make me go from, oh, I'm a fan of Rare because of the DKU, to, oh, I am a fan of Rare because they are Rare. I mean, this is, like, I know Donkey Kong Country is what got me on board with Rare, because Donkey Kong Country was the game I'd been waiting for my entire life. But it was still mostly like, oh, I like Rare because they make Donkey Kong Country, or, oh, I like Rare because they make Diddy Kong Racing. I like Rare because I like Banjo-Kazooie. This is really what made me appreciate Rare for being Rare. And it was just an important final step in my evolution from being a Nintendo fan who liked the Rare games the best to a Rare fan who still buys Nintendo systems because that's what Donkey Kong is on, because Rare made Donkey Kong. So like the whole history with Ultimate, like the studio's pre-existence as Ultimate played the game, stuff that we as Americans would have no understanding of at this point in time, because we didn't have the spectrum over here. We did not have access to any of these games unless you knew somebody who imported stuff like this. Like, this was not on our radar at all.
The first time I ever saw a Spectrum in person was January 2020, when you and me saw a broken one at MagFest.
Yeah, and then it released COVID on the world. It really was like,
it was very broken.
Yeah, it was. Like, because of Rare's website, I knew who Saberman was before he showed up in Banjo-Tooie. Had I just been playing Banjo-Tooie cold, I'd be like, am I supposed to know this guy? But because I was a reader of Rareware, I knew exactly who Saberman was.
Yeah, and something I appreciate with this even today is that Rare's chronicling of their games on Rareware was comprehensive and unfiltered. So like that, the game pages were kind of split into two main sections, which were retro and recent. And by recent, I mean from 1994 onward, because time is an abyss.
I shared that on social media the other day when we started breaking down this episode, because we were both doing our independent research, and I pulled up the recent page on Rare. It's 1994 to the future, and it's like Perfect Dark wasn't even released yet. Perfect Dark was like their newest game on there.
They were still advertising 12 Tales. As an upcoming project.
Yeah, and it's really impressive that in the Perfect Dark description on this page, it says, circa 2023, because that's the year Perfect Dark takes place in. At a time when Perfect Dark wasn't even released. Perfect Dark, the game itself, was in the future. And the setting of Perfect Dark is the current year we are in.
The day that we are recording this episode in the timeline of Perfect Dark, we are one day away from the last thing that happened in game in Perfect Dark.
Oh my god. And now we will have no understanding of what's to come. The future. This is the last thing we know that happens in the future, Cameron. After that, it's uncharted territory.
No, the Mayan calendar ran out, and by that I mean Mayan, like Elvis, the alien.
You mean Mayan, Tusk wife. She left her calendar at TJ Combos.
Yeah, and it burned up in the fire. But I guess what I mean by like unfiltered and comprehensive was it wasn't just the highlight reel of Rare's catalog. It was an attempt to chronicle everything they worked on. And I mean, just from the most obscure, like, licensed schlock that they did on the NES, basically.
Right.
And stuff you just wouldn't hear brought up except to make a joke about, like, the LJN Who Framed Roger Rabbit game, Taboo, The Sixth Sense, Anticipation.
This is where the cult around Anticipation's box art first formed. For those who don't know what Anticipation is, Anticipation was a video like board game that Rare made for the NES, and it has the most striking box art of basically like late 80s yuppies all gathered around, looking like they're having just the most marvelous yet scintillating time one could have, and it's just the cheesiest, like, most of the era, like, snapshot you could possibly obtain.
And in particular, the Rare fandom latched onto who we'd collectively know as Yellow Shirt Guy.
Yellow Shirt Guy, right.
Who is... this is like a photo that has a bunch of people in a singular group shot, but there is one man in the top right corner sort of floating above everyone else, coming in from the side of the composition with a intense gasp on his face.
Right, he looks shocked at whatever's happening. Like, everybody else is looking like, oh my, this is so much fun. He looks like he's terrified.
But yeah, that was another really cool part about this. Wherever possible, there were scans of the box art in this archive.
Yeah, like, I feel like the first time that Lee's fastidious nature, like, ran up against the wall of rights issues was when Disney asked them to pull all of the artwork for the N64 GBC era Disney games, the Mickey Speedway USA and what have you. Like,
yeah, there's like documented apologizing for not having Mickey's Speedway USA content on the website,
because he did have that content up there, and then all of a sudden it just went away because the House of the Mouse said you can't use our images without. They made the game, but you know,
you've got a barbarian threatening people on this website. We can't associate with this,
right? And then I said, oh, all these people who want me to declare the Mickey Speedway USA's DKU because of the Rare cow? No. Yeah, I mean, where he could, like, he definitely wanted to present the ultimate, no pun intended, chronicle of Rare's history. And I mean, he succeeded. Like, I really felt like this is where my understanding of what Rare truly was blossomed. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't know if I would ever learn this stuff if it hadn't been for Rareware, at least, you know, the pre-1994 history.
He even had a section detailing canceled Rare projects on the Limbo page.
Oh, right, and it had the actual Banjo-Kazooie skeleton Limbo on it. That's right, yeah.
Yeah, it had a description of Mire and the box art that is like widely circulated around the internet. had sections on Wrestle Rage and Exterminator, which I would not have known about if not for him detailing this. Into like a brief section with early development info back when Killer Instinct was brute force, with like some early renders and detailing some of the like earlier rejected character names they were floating around. Like the most funny one is TJ Combo going under the name Mr. Fist.
You have to say, for all the people who scoff at the name Killer Instinct as like this very like I don't know, cringeworthy like 90s sort of game title, Brute Force. Oh my god. Like that's
that's a game that has its own cereal.
Yeah. That's just a notch above Primal Rage. Yeah, like it just thinking about the Limbo page, you know, just think of had he kept that going, all the games he could have added to it over the next 10 years.
Oh. What a depressing thought.
Yeah, which Rare Replay thankfully got into some of it, not all of it. That, you know, they couldn't get into all of the Donkey Kong stuff, but yeah, I mean, like I said, like this was just a great look at all the history before Donkey Kong Country that a lot of the fans like us who were coming in as newly minted Rare fans wouldn't have known about, or we wouldn't have realized Rare was behind that game. Like, they did a lot of licensed stuff. You know, I think Battletoads was the first game that, you know, in the Rare era that was really theirs, you know. But
made with the stated goal of having something that could be their baby.
But yeah, of course, when you first go to Rare's website, or when you would first go to Rare's website back in 1998, you would be clicking on the recent tab because you would be most interested in everything from 1994 onward.
Recent games like Donkey Kong Country.
You know, I still think of it as a recent game. I don't care. I feel no shame. It's always recent in my heart. And
it keeps getting re-released, so it's technically always recent.
Yeah. But this is great because you would have such a fully fleshed out treasure trove of text. Some of it would be expanded on from the instruction manual. Like a lot of the Donkey Kong Country ones, it was Lee rewriting the story from the instruction manual, like rewriting the story written by Dan Alson from the original Donkey Kong Country, or expanding on his own text from like the Donkey Kong Country 2 instruction manual. And so you would get like a more in-depth, fleshed out version of the DKC stories than you would get that you know, edited for brevity in the instruction manual. And I mean, like, it was terrific. Like I already mentioned, like the character biographies too, which would be, I think, cast list. So you'd have all the prominent characters in the game, you know, up to and including Swanky Kong.
It should be mentioned, like, those expanded stories were always under the heading "the story so far."
Yeah.
Which has just cemented itself in my lexicon as just a standard phrase meaning a game's backstory.
We stole that shamelessly in early DK
You
Vine.
did.
Yeah.
Because I think I remember seeing it on DK Vine first.
Yeah, and it was so like evocative of a name, and I like that too. The story so far for a game that had been out for years. Like, wait, what are you going to continue this story? Like, are you going to be releasing Donkey Kong Country 0.5 at any point? Like, what does this mean? But yeah, I mean, we were so inspired by everything Lee did on this website. As impressionable youth. I mean, I guess, you know, there are worse places to take inspiration, to have mentors, like, you know, some British writer in the Midlands of, you know, in the countryside writing this nonsense. You know, could have been worse influences on young us. So eventually we found our own voice. It took a while, but yeah, we were just completely aping what he was doing.
The other sections, like for like the quote-unquote recent games, tended to be Critical Mash, which would be like a repository for like review pull quotes.
Yeah.
And I believe as this practice went on of Rare putting critical quotes on their website, I think sometimes Lee would get indulgent and put like a rude one in there just to just to mix it up.
Once you got like closer to the buyout, like when the sort of Gen X hipsterish takes on Rare would start really cropping up, when these gamers who didn't come of age with Rare but were old enough to then write for all of the publications, and they weren't fans of Donkey Kong Country, or they weren't fans of this or that, and they would have a lot more harshness in reviews for their games rather than just the unanimous praise they were getting from 94 through 2000 or so. I think Lee was just like, well, fuck it, well, I mean, what am I gonna do? I roll with the punches here. But yeah, and I like how he had a game help section, because he knew in this era of the internet, people usually searched for games because they were looking for help, because they were stuck, right? And so rather than actually providing a game help section, and his game help section was Ask Uncle Tusk, so he would just provide a link to GameFAQs.
You'd click the button like any other subsection, and this one would just link you off site to the GameFAQs page.
Like this is why I feel like he was a kindred spirit with me, because I also did not care about game help. People would come to DK Vine and look for game help, and I'd be like, this isn't what we're here for. We're here to talk about story and lore and celebrate the world of the games. You want to know where the second creme coin in Bramble Scramble is? I'm not going to tell you that.
You need to look at the back of your Lunchables like everybody else.
So yeah, I just love that was not a genuine aspect of Rareware, except as a joke, right? And for the actual section for game help, because he knew people would be coming looking for it. There's GameFAQs. Leave us alone.
And there was also a gallery section under the recent heading, which, speaking of things that proliferated throughout the rest of the internet, this is the nexus point for a lot of the old promo renders we still have online, especially the ones DK Vine had.
Yeah, if you're wondering why so many of the preserved images from the Donkey Kong Country trilogy are just blurry JPEGs, it's because we got them from Rareware and we've never found a higher source. Sorry. At least we have them at all. I mean, yeah, I mean, and of course, Lee would always brand them with the Rareware logo, the golden slab. He would stamp them on the images. So whenever you see one of those renders floating around online with that Rareware logo on it, that's why it came from the site. One practice, Cameron, that we engaged in was once we read everything on Rareware, we would look at the source, the HTML source code, and we would try to find stuff that wasn't actually published or had links to. We would go digging for hidden images on the site. Occasionally we would find some. Occasionally, I found some dinosaur planet art that hasn't been published. I was like, oh, cool. I mean, this was just a common practice. You knew the website well enough that you knew your way around the back rooms of the website that you weren't supposed to be snooping around in. And it's like, oh my God, you hacked Rareware? No, we just put in different URLs to we just put in different addresses trying to figure out where he might have uploaded some of these images. And yeah, occasionally you would find some, occasionally you would find, music, occasionally, we would never find any massive scoops. We didn't find Donkey Kong 64 stuff uploaded on Rareware prior to January 1st, 1999, but you would still go hunting. It's something I still engage with occasionally today. I'm like, I wonder if Nintendo has anything they're not supposed to have on their website. Around E3 time or whenever it'd be E3 time, you start going snooping,
You'd also, if you were archiving all of the renders up on the site, because, of course you would, they're not anywhere else, you gotta grab them while they're there, you'd sometimes catch an amusing file name on something,
Yeah.
or something that would, I think they got like especially indulgent with it well into like the mid 2000s, was amusing alt text or like hover text.
This was probably, I think, my favorite little flourish of the website, because it not only were there jokes in all of the text, there were jokes hidden if you knew where to look.
I would have to imagine this is where DK Vine giving things comedy captions came from.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's the exact same spirit.
Yeah, and you know, this is back when you would just hover over an image and a little caption would pop up, boop, and you don't see that anymore. You like, that's not a thing anymore.
Yeah, I'll see like webcomics maybe sometimes do it to get an extra joke in, but like it's not really a site-wide, it's not really like an internet-wide practice anymore.
And I think, you know, part of that is like accessibility issues, and like I don't think it would work on mobile, and
no,
yeah,
not really at all.
like you have to have a cursor to make that work, but like every image had one. It was fantastic, and so you had to stop and hover over the image, and then you just wait half a second for it to pop up, and you're like, ha ha ha. And that, you know, if you go through Internet Archive, you can, at the very least, if the image doesn't pop up, you can actually read the image caption in the broken image. So.
And it'll sometimes be funny trying to guess what the image was through the context of what the joke is.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I remember. Well, I'll get into my whole origin story of how I found Rareware, but I do remember like the itch to get back to the site to read more, because I was like, there's so much content here that I have to read. And I want to read it, and it just became the burning drive to get back online on a permanent basis, because this was at the point where my parents had said, you know, we're getting rid of America Online because it's not worth it. It's not worth being on the internet. And so there was like this interim period, I think, from like early 97 to late 1998, where I was not online. And finally, enough had changed in that period where I was able to convince them, hey, we need to go back. We need to get back online, because for me, I'm thinking, I have to constantly read Rareware. But to them, I pitched for school. For my education, it will benefit me greatly. It will give me a leg up on the other students. It's going to be a requirement in the 21st century. I was right, Mom and Dad. But also, America Online changed their pricing, so they no longer like bill you hourly or whatever. It was now you just paid a flat fee and you can be online for as long as you want, which was the game changer. It's what really drove, at least here in the States, people getting online as part of their just monthly bills, the infrastructure of life. That's really where everybody started gravitating towards the internet, and it wasn't just this sort of passing fad in the mid 90s. It was actually part of the fabric of our life. And then, of course, we realized America Online shit, and we actually got on better internet services. But yeah. So, I mean, we've hit upon the major sections, Cameron, but are there any other, there are a lot more sections on Rareware than just what we described. There was other stuff that I don't really recall as well as you do. Is there anything you would like to address?
Well, some of this isn't stuff I recall so much as just things I came up with in this archaeological dig of old code. But just to briefly touch on some of the other things that the site did. I mean, for one, it did operate as a functional corporate website. There was descriptions of Rare's history, the day-to-day life of the studio. There was spotlighting some of the like company roles like designers, programmers, artists, and musicians.
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting one to look back on, which is, quote, Rare Today, where they're talking about the then ongoing renovation at Manor Park with like documented photos of the new studio being built.
For those who don't know, Rare moved into their current sprawling campus, which is called Manor Park, in, was it 2000?
I can't remember the exact date, but there's like looking at this page, you can see like almost time-stamped this page being updated from like just describing the plan to showing pictures of the actual building as the life of the site went on.
Yeah. Because, back, throughout most of the 90s, they were in Manor House. And this is where the terminology barns came from, because they would be out in the barns making games. And then they actually moved to a then state-of-the-art, it's still pretty state-of-the-art, campus that they're currently still at, aside from a brief flirtation with moving their operations into Birmingham, right at the tail end of the Kinect Sports era, before Craig Duncan took over and said, no, we're actually going to stay at Manor Park. This is great. Why would we ever leave this? And like put the investment in to refurbish it then. So if you ever want to know, like what wasn't Rare moving into Birmingham? Weren't they like moving into like this like loft or something, like the upper floor of a building? It's like they were going to do that, and then it was actually the Rare Renaissance era that saved Manor Park, and that's where they remain today.
And of course, being a corporate website, there was also, and this has been a constant through basically everything, a place to submit job applications. And I only bring this up because the earliest iteration of this on Rareware was called Recruitment, and everything on Rare's website in this era tended to have like a character render that was the face of it. And because it was called Recruitment, the character representing this was Clump.
the classic Donkey Kong Country render of Clump with the big nipples. Too hot for Tumblr. Didn't they also have a forum, Cameron? Briefly.
Very, very briefly, which I look up records of it now, and the top post is Lee making a test inflammatory post just to see if things were working right. The forum was discontinued with the next revision of the site in 2001, quote, because there was no compromise to be found between the old manual system and a potentially lethal unmoderated setup.
Yeah.
Like, basically, it's too much.
Yeah, it wasn't like a traditional forum where you could just register and post, right? It was, wasn't Lee just approving everything?
I believe so, but, I mean, it's not really something Rare's official website needed, because that's where places like DK Vine were filling in, really. Right,
when we still had a working forum. The new forum will be up as soon as we get it working. Yeah, I definitely, didn't want to interact with anybody else on the Rare website. Like, I came to interact with Lee, and therefore, vicariously interact with Rare. I first found the Rare website in July of 1998, as I mentioned. And I brought this up in the past when discussing Stop and Swap, because I found their website at my friend Elliot's house. We were searching on his computer, his family's computer, because he was on America Online at the time. We were searching for answers on the ice key and question mark eggs seen at the end of Banjo-Kazooie, because we would not just settle on the game's explanation that, oh, you just had to wait until Banjo-Tooie. We're like, that's nonsense. What what do you mean we have to wait till Banjo-Kazooie? Because we never had this experience of there is this game that you beat. Oh, but you didn't actually beat it. There's still some things that you just have to wait a year or two to get. And we're like, what do you mean? We can't. We have to beat the game. So I started searching for answers to this, and I just stumbled upon Rareware, and I was like, is this like Rare's official website? And I started reading it, and I got answers. Well, not really answers on the ice key and question mark eggs. It was more just the response, like, oh no, you really do have to wait until Banjo-Tooie. Now it's like, all right, but at that point it didn't really matter, because I realized after reading through this for 20 to 40 minutes or so, I was like, oh my God, it's L. Loveday writing all of this. L. Loveday from the credits, from the games. And I was so like giddy. Like I was on Rare's website. I was reading the words of this guy who I vaguely knew of, who I knew had written for Donkey Kong games and Banjo-Kazooie, and then, I was just like drawn in. I was hooked. I was addicted. And like I said, I had to get back online to just constantly be a part of this. And, Rareware, the website, was really where Rare celebrated this notion that there was a shared Rare universe. Like, for example, Lee would mention Diddy Kong in Conker's biography on the 12 Tales page, right? We at DK Vine arrived at the concept of the DKU independently of Rare's website. This is something that, I followed with my aforementioned friend Elliot throughout the years, like when Diddy Kong Racing was announced, and I was like, oh, this means Banjo and Conker are in the same universe. This means they're spinning off of Diddy Kong Racing. And this is something that, Chad had also tracked by himself before we met up in 1999 and started, working on DK Vine. But it was Lee who was actually keeping it consistent at Rare. And, I'm always getting these like gotcha tags on social media where, Chris Seaver, Greg Males will say like, oh, I never intended Conker to be in the same world as Donkey Kong, or I never intended Banjo to be in the same world as Donkey Kong. And they're like, see, there's no DKU. Gotcha. But Lee was the one who was really running with it independently of us. Years before shared universes were in vogue in Hollywood. I mean, this is where it was reinforced and really celebrated, and just this idea that we had this shared universe and it could continue to expand and evolve. Brought up Tip Top earlier. It's amazing how hot Tip Top was in these circles at this point in time. Tip Top was, for whatever reason, just earmarked as this character who, of course, was going to get his own game. He would often come up on Rare's website in Scribes, be like, so when's Tip Top's game coming? Of course we're going to get a Tip Top game. Why wouldn't we get a Tip Top game? The public demands a Tip Top game. And this was all natural. This was all obvious. Second nature. Yeah, Tip Top's going to get his own game. Pipsy's probably going to get her own game. And I don't know. It was just, it was already a magical time with Rare's games. But then to have that level, that next level of fandom and nerdery, where you could then go on Rare's website and fetishize a Tip Top game. I honestly like look back at that time and it always just warms my heart, even though we're so far removed from it. And now, I'm just struggling to get TT and Sea of Thieves. I mean, we've long since passed the point where we have any hope of any Diddy Kong Racing character getting their own game who's not, Banjo or Conker. Even Diddy Kong getting his own game seems like just this ludicrous notion these days. But Yeah, I look back and I'm like, yeah, it just felt like anything was possible back then. And that was really the magic of Rareware and Scribes, and it's the effect that it had on my fandom because, like I said, I identified as a Nintendo fan. I was a Nintendo kid. I had an NES, I had a Super Nintendo, got an N64. I was firmly against Sega, the evil Sega Genesis, and the way it tried to sully the good name of Nintendo. I was so just hardcore in that, like, this is my brand identity. I identify with Nintendo. I'm a Nintendo kid. And reading Rareware really did make me realize, I really just like Rare's games far and away above everything else. Doesn't mean I don't like Nintendo's games, even though that's, kind of the identity I took on for a while, DK Vine. But it just meant like Rare just sort of like hit that bullseye every time with what I was looking for in a video game, especially that commitment to world building. And yeah, I mean, I don't think I would really have made that full evolution into who I became, DK Vine Hyle, if it wasn't for Rareware, for better or for worse. And let me tell you, we started DK Vine August 22nd, 1999. So, little over a year after I first found Rareware. And Rareware definitely did start percolating that notion in my head, like, be it great to have a website about all of this, specifically, like, stripped down to my niche interest, which was the DKU. And that sense of accomplishment when we got DK Vine into Rareware's Elsewhere section, which was their page of offsite links to other video game websites and Rare fan sites. Because RareNet, the biggest Rare fan site up until that point was RareNet. And of course, RareNet, we always viewed with envy and that kind of like, okay, this is the competition. This is who we have to best. We have to best RareNet. And RareNet was a couple of guys who were older than us. They were college age. They were better writers than us. They were, had a better presentation, but we had scrappiness. We had real get up and go, and we were like, we want to be bigger than RareNet. And so when we got on that Elsewhere page underneath RareNet, it felt hugely validating for us. Like, oh my God, we're on Rare's website. We've made it. And now DK Vine is bigger than RareNet. We won eventually. But
kind of Highlandered a lot of those other Rare sites over the years.
All we had to do was just persevere. They all just fell on their own. We didn't do anything. And it's just funny nowadays because now we have this big like shared sense of family, right? Like, I'm not at competition with Rare Gamer or DKC Atlas. We're friends. We're all friends. But back then it was very much like, you're doing it wrong. We're going to take you out.
There's also not even this like this sense of factionalism that there used to be with Rare fan sites because everybody sort of carved out their own little niche. It's like, yeah, we're DK Vine, but we're still talking about Perfect Dark and Everwild and things that like aren't DKU or aren't DKU yet.
Yeah, I was gonna say Everwild. We're gonna make that DKU somehow. We'll worry about that when Everwild is released. So we have a good 10 to 15 years yet.
We're a lot more flexible, I think, about widening the net than we used to be. Like, Killer Instinct is DKU.
Well, that's because Log was in it, Cameron. Do I need to take you back to our Tribunal episode?
The one I was on.
Yeah, no, you were there. We don't have to re-argue this. Look, it's just funny how the culture has changed, right? With Rare fandom, because back then, like, I think the only like factional like divide you have in the Rare fandom might be like, it's sort of below our purview, where you have the people who were like, I liked Rare back in the 90s when they were with Nintendo. And then you have the people who are just all about Sea of Thieves and nothing predating Sea of Thieves. But I think like the big Rare fandom sites that identify as Rare fans that are still standing, we're all friends, and we all really have this, like, open celebration. Like, look, DK Vine's not going to touch upon all the stuff that Rare Gamer touches upon. Rare Gamer's not going to be talking about Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. And we recognize that, hey, we all have valid things to add to the discourse. We can't, you know, we can't be everything, so it's great that you're there.
There's room for all of us to exist, because not any one of us can be the everything.
Right. And like back in the day, Rare felt so huge and sprawling that you would have like, oh, you like Rare, but you only like the first person shooters. We're gonna destroy you. Because you don't like Banjo-Kazooie as much as we do. We're gonna burn you to the ground. And it's just ludicrous now, but I mean, it's a very much a childlike early teenage kind of sensibility towards all of this, where if you don't see things completely eye to eye the way we see things, you are the enemy. It's funny in hindsight, but yeah, Rareware was the thing that could bring us all together. You know, these different factions of Rare fans. It's like, but we're all reading Rareware. We're all going to this website together. And it did make you interested in even the stuff you weren't interested in. Like, I would read about Blastcore on Rareware, where, you know, Blastcore didn't really appeal to me as a gamer, as a fan, but it sure was fun seeing Lee's enthusiasm for Blastcore. So,
yeah, if I didn't buy or wasn't interested in a game at the time, I'd still be looking up the artwork. I'd still be interested in listening to the music.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, almost 3 years to the day that Rareware launched, it was actually May 15th, 2001. This is when we had the first big renovation to the website. And this is the one that really sticks out in my mind as the dividing line between classic Rareware and the more modern Rare fan site. This was just a blip in the history, but this felt huge at the time, considering, you know, how often we all visited the site. This was the first time they really gave it a makeover to make it look more contemporary. With, you know, the internet changed very rapidly from 1998 to 2001. It was more ubiquitous. It was more mainstream by that point. And they gave it the very first refurbishments at this point in time. Do you want to discuss the new site aesthetics of Rare?
Yeah, and I call it new site because for ages after this refurb kind of happened, Rare had a link on the welcome page called New Site Explanation, which I don't think anybody does this anymore. You just kind of like, well, no, we changed it. Fuck you.
Right.
So the biggest difference in this is marked, and this was a total visual overhaul of the site. Like, as you said, it's a lot more contemporary. I think I describe it as a bridge between Rareware and what kind of the site would become in the future. Most of the old content was still around. Most of it just like, a lot of it got like a little updates here and there. Some stuff was fleshed out, but the old logo was gone. The Rareware logo, that brand is retired. That branding for the website is retired. Doesn't have the gradiented like wavy jazz font anymore. Everything is a very like clean sans serif text. It's honestly maybe a bit more readable.
Probably.
Not that the old site was particularly bad in that regard either. The background color changed from dark blue to sort of, I describe it as like the color of denim jeans, like denim blue jeans kind of. And most notably, I think it had introduced a right-aligned navigation bar credited in the new site explanation to a designer named Sue, no last name given, which was the navigation bar was sort of an elongated version of the Rare slab logo, with the bottom section made up of various navigation pages. Unfortunately, this is I think the first major breakage you encounter trying to view Rare's web presence on the Wayback Machine.
Yup.
Because it's effectively trying to load 2 web pages at once.
Yeah.
And a lot of the images are broken.
This is where I just give up. When I try to like go down memory lane, I'm like, oh yeah, this road's closed for repairs. I can't go down that way.
Which is a shame, because then you miss like heading pages with Wrinkly Kong and Bellamy Bear.
Oh yeah. This is where we first, we in the outside of the UK got the first notion that Bramble Bear from off of Donkey Kong Country 3 had a localized name exclusively to the UK and Europe. Was it Bellamy Bear? Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is it's a reference that doesn't translate. So
right. Yeah, it was named after a presenter, some garden show. I don't know, but yeah, it's I liked the new site look. It definitely didn't bother me all that much. I definitely have more nostalgia and fondness for that dark blue jazz font, just classic look for the site. But this did look more contemporary. This did look more professional, but it still retained the same spirit. Like nothing was really abandoned at this point.
Yeah, I don't think there's really a lot to take issue with, just because the old content was by and large still there, and if anything, like more fleshed out. For instance, Hyle, did you know the cast list for Perfect Dark got its own like bespoke character art created just for it?
I did not know. I did not know that, because I don't read RareNet. Why would I ever know this?
I know you're lying, because I bragged about it like a month ago. That I tracked it all down. And this iteration of the site retained Uncle Tusk and Scribes, and retained the entire archive of them.
That's right, but this iteration of the site would not be long for the world. This only lasted until September 24th, 2002, which is the time of the Rare buyout, when Microsoft purchased Rare, and it brought with it the most dramatic changes to Rare's website, and it would really be the dividing line between Rare's website as we knew it and loved it and the future.
So I think I can speak to this. I think I touched on this in our episode about the Rare buyout.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe I didn't really have like reliable home internet access until the year 2000. So I had missed a lot of the heyday of the original iteration of Rareware. The first one that I clearly remember was the new site, because I remember going to Rare's webpage looking for info on Star Fox Adventures and encountering a little taste of everything else that made the site so significant.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where I was like semi-regularly checking in on Rare's official website in 2002, leading up to Star Fox Adventures coming out. And one day I was on a friend's computer with the idea of like, hey, I want to show you this really cool website.
Oh no.
And I log on, and this must have been on or around September 24th, 2002. I load up the page, and I don't remember there being like a flash welcome screen on this website. I'm just going to click through that, and I am greeted with a very unfamiliar and familiar looking web page. Previously, Fox McCloud was the marquee character on the website, because Rare would periodically, as new releases were coming out, the the main page of the site when you first loaded in would kind of be updated with a character render relevant to like a recent release, or just rotated out to do something different once in a while.
Sure.
At that point, it was Fox McCloud. Following September 24th, it became Cameo. And I mean early Cameo, like white dress and pink Cameo.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a really sparse-looking website here. Doesn't look like as much as here. What's this welcome message? Welcome to the new online home of Rare, a high-profile software developer currently beginning the latest chapter in a long and memorable journey through the gaming world. Partnership with Microsoft and the intention to create top-tier games for its Xbox console.
And this would have been fine. Like, we're not going to be discussing the buyout on this episode. We did a big episode for the 20th anniversary of the buyout last season. I recommend you check that out. It's a very fair look at the emotions that were swirling at the time. This wouldn't have been bad. But the problem is, with the buyout, with their then very, very recent divorce with Nintendo, this meant they had to go scorched earth on all of that beloved, treasured content on Rareware's site. Now just, what was it? Welcome to Rare is what they called the website at this point. Or what we called the website, because it was just Welcome to Rare.
Yeah, it greeted you with Welcome to Rare.
And so we called the website almost as sort of a like derisive pointed like way to refer to it. Oh, welcome to Rare. It's not Rareware anymore. It's Welcome to Rare. Yeah. We are kicking the sand beneath our feet because we were so just dejected, because this was like so my parents never divorced, so I never experienced like the weird, like, your world as you knew it is basically dividing. But this is kind of what it felt like, I would imagine. It was heartbreaking and disorienting to suddenly have all of the Nintendo content, Donkey Kong content, Star Fox Adventures content even, just poof.
When we say scorched earth, it wasn't just the Nintendo stuff that got caught up in this lighting everything, pouring gasoline on everything and lighting a match.
Yeah.
Most of the site content was just completely scrubbed. Uncle Tusk's last iteration on the last layout was April 9th, 2002. All the records completely gone. Scribes completely gone. The archives would only go back as far as when the new iteration of the site launched.
Yeah, Scribes would continue, but the archives of Scribes gone.
Which, as we mentioned on the buyout episode, meant that the very first iteration you could read on Welcome to Rare, as far back as you can go, began with a very lengthy section of people just giving Rare no end of shit over the buyout.
Yeah.
Very, very fun.
Well, and like, for me, as a fan of this website, I might have been able to handle the buyout better at the time, had that history still been represented on the website. But this was really the turning point of the website, too, where it became less Lee's personal playground, his pride and joy, and it slowly started becoming a more, like, forward-facing, polished representation of Rare. Like, Lee still injected a ton of his personality in it, but all of that work he put into all of these pages had to be removed, because at this point, you can't have Donkey Kong renders everywhere. We don't even, like, eventually, tensions would thaw with Nintendo and Rare, and they would work together to celebrate their shared heritage. But at this point, nobody knew what the future would entail, and so there was this stark divide.
I think it also put in a really unenviable position at this point in time because, he had been the liaison between Rare and the fandom and cemented that sort of niche for himself, and Rare's website has become this institution, and now he kind of had to step into the role of damage control, basically.
Yeah, it's really, I imagine, an amazing role to be the sort of buffer between the fandom and a beloved studio when it's May 1998 and said studio is at the height of their renown and powers. And it's another thing entirely to be in that same role for some years later when you've just announced to your fandom that the console they all just bought to follow the studio will now not have the studio's games on it, and they've been bought by the competition, this startup owned by the reviled Microsoft, because this is coming off of the 90s,
oh yeah, I mean, people think like Microsoft has a bad public image today.
Yeah.
It wasn't great in the late 90s either.
No, I mean, Microsoft was reviled among techies in the 90s for their antitrust policies. They were taken to court by the government and, just for monopolizing and forcing people to use their software and all this stuff. So
totally different from today.
But I mean, I think we've all just kind of accepted it today. Like it's Microsoft, and
everybody's doing
it. But at the time, it was quite controversial. And then for them to say we're getting into the video game market with the Xbox, of course, people were just like, "This isn't your realm. Get out of here."
This even led to early in this iteration of the site, it had a dedicated letter to fans button.
Yeah.
That was a PR statement from Chris and Tim Stamper basically saying look, we know you all are kind of upset, confused, nervous, angry about this, but Rare has existed for a long time. This is just another chapter in our history. We thank you for your support. We're still going to make the kinds of games you love.
Yeah. And I think for those of us who had fully adopted the identity, the mentality of being Rare fans first and foremost, all this meant for us is, one, we're going to have to buy an Xbox, and two, I hope Nintendo treats Donkey Kong right. So, and of course, are we ever going to get a follow-up to Star Fox Adventures? But for a lot of the fandom, they still view themselves as Nintendo fans who really liked Rare's games. And so to be in Lee's position now, he had to sort of take all of this negative energy, this torrent of angry letters and feedback, and put a positive spin on it. And sort of, like you said, do damage control. I don't know how he did it. Well, I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he's still at Rare today. Because this would have broken most people. Right? I would have been like, all right, as soon as we get over this hurdle, I'm leaving. I'm going to calmer waters. This is nonsense. This is not what I signed up for. I don't know how he did it. I really don't. As somebody who does have a degree of social anxiety and struggles being the face of something as low pressure as DK Vine, I don't know how he managed this period of his life, this period of Rare.
I don't know how he came out of this, and not only came out of this, but also had a sense of humor about it as well.
Yeah.
I have said that Rare's approach, or specifically Lee's approach to how this was handled on the public face of Rare's website, because I was in this position of well, I already hitched my wagon to a GameCube. I just can't play Rare games anymore, I guess. And I don't know what's going to happen to Donkey Kong. But Rare's website existing in this capacity let me vicariously stay a Rare fan.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was getting constant updates on everything they were doing, well-presented information, and it was all in this very personable, humanized tone.
Yeah. And I think, it did help that he did get support from a lot of the fans. Like, we at DK Vine, like, a lot of us, we didn't abandon Rare, and I think, had everybody just been like, bye, you're dead to us, that would have been harder for him. But, we did stick around, and I hope that helped him during this ugly transition between the Nintendo years and the Microsoft years. But yeah, like I look back at that time, and I couldn't even read like that first edition of Scribes because it was too painful to see all of that ugliness. And like I read through it, but it was just like, at that point I'd already made the decision, well, I'm gonna have to get an Xbox, and this isn't my preferred outcome either, but I'm gonna try to make the best of this. I'm still gonna be a fan of Rare. I'm still gonna want to follow Banjo-Kazooie and Conquer and whatever else they do. So, but to see that vitriol, it was rough.
Sure was. But this version of the site, or rather, this version of the site got a slight refresh around May 26, 2003. At least that's the archive.org date for the earliest version I could find.
Uh-huh.
Because Rare's brand got a refresh around the release of Ghoulies, where they dropped the slab logo.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, the last appearance in-game of the classic Rareware slab and branding was Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge. And then Grabbed by the Ghoulies, their first for the Xbox, was the one that had the buyout era Rare logo, which I do like. It's not as iconic, but I was fine with it at the time.
I think it's a logical step forward, and it's the logo that first drops the Ware from the iconography, so it is just branded as Rare.
Yeah.
Which I think is completely the right move.
Sure, for sure.
I still think this is a good, like, iconic logo for them. But because they rebranded, the site layout had to change as well, kind of restructured around the new look. And this is one of the ones that sticks in my head the most because like I said, I was vicariously keeping up with everything they were doing. Like, well, I can't play Ghoulies, but I still want to look at things. I want to read the Tepid Seat. I want to follow all this Conquer stuff because Live and Reloaded looks insane. Like the prettiest video game I'd ever seen at the time.
Right.
Oh, and they've got an MP3 section hosting like new music and a bunch of old N64 tracks. And I'm looking over all the wallpapers and screenshots and reading Scribes, and I was just super into the site around this time because, again, like, I can't play the games. I'm grasping at any straw I can.
And again, the spirit of the site was retained, while stuff like Uncle Tusk was no longer there, while all of that, great content that was there pre-buyout was gone. It was still Lee behind it. He was still the same writer he was before. And so we kept coming back to it. And yeah, I was right there with you. Like, this is that weird point in DK Vine history where I was only, like, devoted myself part-time to DK Vine, and but I was still very much into, like, the concept of the DKU and everything Rare was doing, and Live and Reloaded, yeah, like, that was the game we were all sort of hyping ourselves around, especially when Donkey Kong Jungle Beat looked, well, we were uncertain, let's just say, of what was happening with Donkey Kong at the time, but Conquer looked gorgeous. Conquer was going to be Xbox's mascot, Cameron. It was the golden age that was opening up for Conquer.
It was following Live and Reloaded on Rare's website that got me to track down Bad Fur Day because I was too young for it when it first released. Technically still too young for it when I got it secondhand.
I have to admit that this version of Rare's website is the last one that really sticks out in my mind. Because I think the next time they had a refresh, it would be a few years later. It would be like late 2006, around the time of the 360, right?
Yeah, we should also mention, even though Uncle Tusk fell by the wayside, Mr. Pants was still around and, in a way, kind of appropriated his role a little bit.
Oh, the Pants board. That's right.
Yeah, the Pants board. So the survey section and Uncle Tusk kind of got merged into one thing spiritually, which was the survey responses were now publicly posted, and Mr. Pants would comment on them.
Well, you know, this was really ramping up to the true height of Mr. Pants' career, which was in the mid-aughts. So it makes sense that Mr. Pants would only continue to grow and influence. Meanwhile, we wouldn't have a new Killer Instinct game for years. So yeah, get Tusk out of here. So yeah, it was around the launch of the 360, somewhere around then, that they launched the next iteration of Rare's website, which I don't remember. I have to admit, like, I was more detached at this point in time. This was when I started to kind of like concentrate on other aspects before I decided to become a Donkey Kong journalist. So this is when I started, you know, working on my screenwriting, and I wasn't paying attention quite as much.
I do vividly remember this layout. It was, I think we kind of collectively call it the iPod design, because, I mean, that was kind of the conceit of the theming for this. Was it was a very sleek, like, MP3 player style layout, in baby blue with, like, white frames around everything, and an interactive animated navigation panel with sound. And an MP3 player, like, very elaborate setup, you know, kind of appropriate for Rare because historically their music has always been spectacular. But I say I vividly remember it. Unfortunately, revisiting those memories is very complicated because this iteration of the website used Flash.
The plugins that Lee so, like, loudly eschewed when he first built the site would just become more and more omnipresent as the site would go on, and which means revisiting these eras is nigh impossible.
Yeah, you can find the odd page from this iteration of the site on Wayback, but you have a hard time getting anywhere because the navigation bar just straight up does not work. But I do have fun memories of some of the things they were able to do with this. Some of the, like, there were little bits of animation here or there on their website. I actually associate the cameo character Deep Blue with a very specific thing because of this website, which was there was an animated Deep Blue on the, like, it was either the extras section or the recruitment section, where if you hovered over him, a, like, cartoon growly noise would play, and his mouth would kind of move in, like, a very, like, basic marionetted, like, fashion. And I would accidentally hover over him all the time, so I just hear growl, growl, growl. There was even an Easter egg on the site, where if you clicked a specific part of the MP3 navigation bar, it would launch out a hidden section with a Simon dial on it. The color matchmaking.
Just a game of Simon for no reason.
Yeah, game of Simon, like in DKC3.
Right, get a banana bird, set it free.
Which led you, if you finished a few rounds of it successfully, you'd be taken to a hidden page that had a contest link.
Oh, what was the contest?
I couldn't tell you because I didn't submit anything in time and I felt too sad to look it back up.
Okay, fair enough.
I think that's where like the nuts and bolts mugs you occasionally see surface on eBay came from.
Okay.
They were like one of the prizes in it. And the page stuck around even after the contest ended for people who just wanted to have fun with the Simon game.
This version of the site did last, I think, into 2010, did it not? Like to the Kinect Sports era.
Into like early to mid 2010, and the final full-sized edition of Scribes we would get was September 18th, 2009.
Wow, it's wild to think that Scribes, like the full editions of Scribes even lasted into the Obama administration. But yeah, like at that point he just did, what was it, mini Scribes?
So in around June 15th, 2010, that's when the next big rebrand happened. I say that again, I'm dating it to... Well, this actually got a news post on January 15th about the rebrand, but it doesn't necessarily mention the website. It just mentions Rare's rebrand in the 2010s, which the site was themed around. The universally beloved multicolor shape Rare logo.
Yeah, we try to put a positive spin on things here at DK Vine. We are a fan of quite a bit of the Xbox years of Rare. We loved Grab by the Ghoulies, Viva Pinata, Sea of Thieves, of course, Cameo. And generally, we try to be optimistic even about eras or games we're not that enthusiastic about. This Rare logo is garbage. I'm sorry. I will never like this Rare logo. No.
No, and we even have like testimonials from like former Rare employees about hating this logo. I don't like it. It's too different from anything they've done before, and pushes back their like most recognizable iconography to the far reaches of the top right hand corner. It's a little too clean, a little too sterile, and a little bit unfocused to me.
It's that awful 2010 era aesthetic of let's just strip everything down. Like, let's just strip all the design out of design. And just have... I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it. Like, Rare's logo needs to have a golden R in there somewhere.
Yeah, there's no gold, there's no blue. It's gray and whatever color was backing the logo.
Yeah, I fucking hate this. Oh my god. But yeah, the site changed June 2010, and of course, like I wasn't. This is the same time frame that Donkey Kong Country Returns was announced. Right? And so my attention, if I'm honest, was completely elsewhere at this point, where I was going to Retro's site. It's like, oh my god, they have a banana on Retro's site. Ah! And I wasn't paying attention to this depressing era of Rare.
It genuinely felt around this time that we just had, like, this constant scale tip between whether interesting things were going on with Donkey Kong or interesting things were going on with Rare. Never simultaneously.
Yeah, this post nuts and bolts just collapse of Rare into the Kinect studio, which again, as I always say when we bring this up, the Kinect sports games are very good at what they do. They're the best examples of those types of games, and they're full of polish and charm. It's just not what I think most people associate with Rare. It's not Rare games.
It was a very hard sell at the time.
It was.
Especially coinciding with the rebrand.
Yes, and when it speaks volumes that the studio knew they had to get away from that after Rivals sort of, and well, not just Rivals. Rivals, I think, was the best Kinect sports game, but the Kinect just collapsed at that point in time. Rivals didn't do well. And Rare just went through the whole rebrand again to get back to some of their core identity.
They kind of had to they were kind of forced into this hard pivot because, well, they kind of restructured the entire studio around only doing Kinect games, and then the Kinect wasn't happening anymore.
Yeah,
and people weren't buying it with their Xbox Ones.
Yeah. So, suffice to say, I do not remember the Kinect Sports era site. I might have gone there once or twice and gotten sad and just looked away.
I think part of why this one doesn't stick in my memory as much is just because there wasn't as much anymore. Like, the game section is pretty much... I think this is a trend for, like, Rare's web presence going forward, where they're no longer a great archive of their own history as far as their game catalog goes.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that we were still paying attention to Rare's web presence for were folded into a singular blog section. And this is where we got a continuation of Scribes still in some form in what was called mini Scribes.
Which is not to be confused with snippets, which is what they called the short letters, and I guess snippy responses that Lee would give at the end of the full-length Scribes back in the day. Of course, anchored by the Banjo-Kazooie crab baddie snippet.
Yeah, there's a specific snippet burned into my memory that I'm just never going to forget, and it's basically something that I just reference all the time, essentially, by extension. And like for context, snippets were often like somebody would write in with like one or two sentences.
I sat on my Banjo-Kazooie cartridge. Help.
Like, I've got a page pulled up. One of them was, "You guys need your own form. Signed a concerned individual." The response in all lowercase, "We so don't, dude." But the reason I have this iteration pulled out, February 28th, 2007, a reader named Poga wrote, "Thank you for your interest in Rare." Which, do you want to explain the significance of that, Hyle?
I'm gonna let you, Cameron.
Well, actually, this is one that I'm not as well versed in the source of.
Oh, okay.
I just know it as like a standard clapback of Lee's.
So what Lee would have the habit of when somebody would send in a terse letter or a really mind-numbingly stupid letter, he would give a response and he would end it with "Thank you for your interest in Rare," as this faux diplomatic, professional PR kind of statement that he would not normally give.
Right. The humor was in that this is the response you would get on literally any other corporate website.
Right, and we are so not a corporate website, so that therein lied the humor, and yes.
This snippet was, making a funny, throwing this back in his face. And this was the response from Lee. "I'm not interested in Rare, man. Everyone left in 2002, and now they're rubbish. Read it in a forum. Must be true."
This is where, like, a lot of the... I think the clapback memes in the Rare fan community, like, really, really originated from, too, where, like, all the good ones...
This is what I think of every time I say all the good people.
Yeah, all the good ones or all the good people at Rare left in insert year here. Which is stuff you would see, on the internet, but this is where it was kind of crystallized in the mind for Rare fans as kind of just a shorthand. Yeah.
Yeah, many Scribes had lived, and it was functionally Scribes. It was just there were less letters than usual,
which makes sense because how many people really were writing in about Kinect Sports on a regular basis?
We're also encroaching on the increased prevalence of social media. Like, Rare had a Twitter account by this time.
Yeah. And
as much memories I have wrapped up in Rare's website, and the bittersweet like discontinuation of a lot of them over the years, like, I have to acknowledge it on some level, like, social media kind of makes a letter column redundant.
Right. Yeah.
When you can just @Rare at any point in time with a question.
They probably won't respond, but yes, I mean, even if you can bypass their corporate account and just go straight to the people who run the Twitter account, and you're more likely to get a response. So
it's also a lot easier now that we just know a lot of these people's first and last names.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Hey, Grant Kirkhope hasn't worked at Rare in years, but if you him about the DK rap, he will probably say something to you.
Probably, yes.
Please don't bother Grant Kirkhope just because I said that.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, like, the internet was changing around this time, so a lot of the very unique things that made Rare's website relevant and a must visit were kind of falling by the wayside. I mean, DK Vine, we're still around, and we're doing very well for ourselves, compared to, the past, but we're never going to have a letters column again. That's just stupid. That's nonsense. Like, why would we have a letters column? Like, you can just ask me something on social media at DK Vine, and I will probably respond, depending.
And Rare can still be sardonic and quippy in their responses. Maybe not as overtly rude as and flirting with trouble as they could back in the day.
We're not going to threaten violence against anybody, but all the other things are on the table. Sure, it's just the loss of the history that I find discouraging, right? When a website goes through a refurbishment and they just lose everything, that's when I'm like, but there's so much great stuff on there, like worthwhile stuff, like history that, as in my mind, is as important as the history of your games. Even if it's just history about your games, it's still valued history to me.
As I said, the final mini Scribes was in July of 2012. Another Rare feature did crop up on the blog space one last time, which was a very belated Tepid Seat for Viva Pinata Trouble in Paradise in 2015.
Yeah, that's I would say very belated.
And I bring this up because I said I would circle back around to this, and I think it is one of the more evocative cases of what we just talked about, with the changing landscape of the internet kind of making some of these features redundant, which was after the release of the game, Rare solicited questions for an iteration of the Tepid Seat for Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. I remember this because it was the very first time I ever wrote into Rare.
Oh no.
And it was specifically to ask. I don't remember exactly what I wrote. I'm sure it was terribly written. But the gist of it was, hey, it's odd that this is the one Banjo game that doesn't have Tip-Tup really in it at all, except for Grunty's Revenge, where he's just name dropped. Was there ever a plan to put him in? And if so, like, what did he look like? And that Tepid Seat was completely left unresolved. According to someone, even prodded Rare's Twitter account in 2010 asking for an update on it, and specifically a status update on the Q&A was, nobody's providing the A's.
Oh. I do appreciate, Cameron, that you were writing in about Tip-Tup as late as that date, because keeping the spirit alive of classic Rareware.
But I did end up getting a response to that in a way when, unprompted, Ed Bryan just tweeted out his Banjo X design.
Yeah.
And I thanked him right then and there, like, you have no idea how many years I've been waiting to see this.
Can't say I really like his Banjo X design, that Tip-Tup. Not my favorite Tip-Tup, that's for sure, but interesting nonetheless. So yeah, of course then with the Renaissance, E3 2015 when they announced Rare Replay and Sea of Thieves and introduced the new logo, the current logo, which I think we're all a fan of. Definitely embracing some of what was lost even back when they got rid of the Rareware slab.
Arguably the best logo they've had.
Yeah, like I will always be most nostalgic for the Rareware slab, but this I think has the best of both that and the buyout era Rare logo.
And
so
you don't have to render a new 3D model every time you want to use it.
Right. So they refreshed everything on the website on this day. And I know it was the day, like right after they announced Sea of Thieves. We were walking out of the theater because that was the first E3 we attended in person. So it was me, Chad, Amir, and Steve from off of Rare Gamer all walking out together. And I think it was Amir who pulled it up on his phone. He was like, "Oh, they've updated Rare's website. It's different now." And we saw the new look for the Renaissance era. But this was more of a stopgap, I think.
Yeah, this seems like it was very transitionary in the way of, we're completely dropping this branding. We can't have our website look like this anymore.
Yeah.
We need to put something up. So it was kind of a singular, like, infinitely scrolling page almost that just kind of highlighted Rare Replay, Sea of Thieves. Here's what job life is like at Rare. Here's all your social media accounts. Looked pretty, but there's not a lot there.
Yeah, and at this point, I honestly wasn't checking in on Rare's site even on a monthly basis anymore. So it was just like, oh, this is cool, but I can get all this information elsewhere. And had Rare's website not slowly been eroded over the years, that might not have been the case, but I sort of knew there would be no reason to continually visit. There wasn't going to be new Scribes about Sea of Thieves, as cool as that would have been. So it was just like, oh, well, thank God they got rid of the old logo, I guess.
And that eventually would get a more meaty update in February of 2016, whereabouts. They did flesh it out into more of a complete website with individual sections and news pages. We're still not getting Scribes, and you're still not getting like a massive archive of games, but it was worth checking in on every now and then because you did get newly written dedicated news articles.
Yeah.
And this is memorable for me because, I didn't at this point in time, I didn't need to look at Rare's website to follow news on DKU stuff because I was working for DK Vine. I already knew it. It was my job to know it.
Yeah.
But they were still fun to read. Lee was still penning them with help, I believe, as the web team expanded.
Right.
But a cool thing about this was occasionally a news article would come up and have just this obscure render from the archives coming out of nowhere. Like when Banjo-Kazooie had a major anniversary, we got a crisp version of this render of Banjo and Kazooie sitting around a campfire.
Right. No longer blurry JPEGs. You would actually get as decent a quality as they could pull out.
I even remember, there was a Killer Instinct article that had... It was flanked in the far background by a semi-transparent image of Spinal. And I remember that day digging through the HTML, I gotta pull that image out. I gotta figure out where he's buried it.
Yeah.
And stick that in a folder somewhere.
Well, do we want to even address what the website looks like nowadays?
It sure is a corporate website.
Yeah, it was November of last year that Rare's website got the newest refresh, which I would say was the last dying gasp of the Rareware of old. It's a corporate website now.
Yeah, I don't want to sound too mournful or disparaging here, but it is just kind of the it was kind of the sign of like, oh, this iteration of the site is no longer really aimed at people like me anymore.
No, really not. And that's not to say like Rare doesn't have web presence like off social media that's not worth checking out, because seaofthieves.com still has quite a bit to dig into. But it's all centered around that one game. You're not going to get this whole like chronologue of Rare from the mid 80s onward.
I'd compare it to how we've said as much that Sea of Thieves being this forever game that is always getting new content, always getting new writing, and has this constant presence in our lives makes it easier to swallow that it's been the only Rare game since it came out.
Right. Well, I mean, not counting things like Battletoads 2020.
Only in-house. Only entirely in-house Rare release, I'll say.
Yeah.
I think in that way, there's not Rare's website no longer existing as it did is not the death of that spirit at Rare, because I can still go on their social media pages or the Rare website, or frankly, Rare's games themselves, now that they're a lot more text heavy, and encounter that spirit.
Sure.
It's still there. It's just no longer in the place I used to look.
And as someone who is a fan of that website, it's just a shame to see the disregard, I think, for it. And Lee's no longer writing for the website, it should be pointed out. He has no involvement with the current site.
Still at Rare, just not working on the website.
Yes, still at Rare. You can still read his writings elsewhere, in Sea of Thieves, off Sea of Thieves, but just not on the website. And just to see that I don't know, just a bland corporate website, just it's like a thumb in the eye of the Rareware of old, man. It's sold out. It got a haircut.
There is a lot of, I think this is still a work in progress website that they've got here. But I think the striking thing is repeated throughout, like, it feels like every page in bold letters is the phrase, "We create the kind of games the world doesn't have." And in my mind, I have to compare that to the byline that used to be on Welcome to Rare. It's possible you might know some of our games and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a far cry from Sean Williamson Kong, I'll say that much. Cameron, what are some of the things we have learned from Rareware, the site, throughout the years? Memorable pieces of development trivia or lore, in-universe lore, that we wouldn't have otherwise known?
Well, we obviously don't have time to cover it all, but like we're only just some back and forth of the things that we specifically remember that stand out in our mind.
Okay, I'll let you start.
Okay, so this is from a response to a Scribes request, because it was mentioned that some of Fiddlesworth's innuendos were taken out of Grab by the Ghoulies. So someone asked for a list. So here's the response.
I like that I made you read this. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. And I'll read the whole first part of the response, since this was a two-part letter. "I bet you weren't really expecting them, but here they are, direct from the head of the Ghoulies team. Parents, send your impressionable offspring out of the room. Pregnant women and people with heart problems, look away now. After a quick delve in my recycle bin, I managed to unearth Fiddlesworth's shocking profanities for everyone to finally enjoy. Disclaimer, any Microsoft legal folk or gentle souls offended by obscene vegetable and farmyard animal-related quips should read no further. Sow my seeds. Parentheses, stayed until the very last minute.
Oh.
Caress my cucumber. Parentheses, stayed for perhaps only one version, funnily enough. This is the one that sticks with me. Manhandle my marrow. parentheses, then changed to measure my marrow, but still to no avail. Rub my radish. Choke my chicken.
Oh,
that
yeah.
one's a little too blatant.
Yeah, I couldn't get away with that.
Rub my rooster.
They really wanted
Parentheses.
to rub something.
Parentheses, got changed to roast my rooster and was accepted. Gobble my gherkin.
We were robbed. We really
and
were.
And then, wash my lettuce. Parentheses, though I still don't understand what the problem was with that. It wasn't even particularly funny, let alone risque. I think we learned that lettuce is an actual slang term, and that's why they couldn't use it.
Yeah, I think it's prison lingo. I think it's something like it's tossing one's salad and then peeling one's potatoes. I think, did peel my potatoes get in? Was that a Fiddlesworth-ism?
The last line of this says, crunch my carrots, pick my plums, and pet my piglet almost got thrown out, but managed to stay by the skin of their teeth.
Okay, well, thank God we got pet my piglet.
Pet my piglet is a really good one.
Yeah. One of the things we've learned from Rare's website was that it was Bumper who was the jailed Diddy Kong racer first mentioned by Conker in a live and reloaded press interview.
Yeah, we sort of had this, like, protracted arc where we found out someone was in jail, found out it was Bumper, and then kind of an illusion as to why it was Bumper.
Yeah. But yeah, that was a whole, like, multi-year story arc, that Bumper's incarceration, where he also learned washing one's lettuce and other such phraseology. But yeah, the whole thing with a jailed Diddy Kong racer didn't necessarily come from the website. That was, again, a live and reloaded, like, press release or something. But the fact that it was continued on Rare's website, Lee developed it, this whole arc that Bumper was jailed for what's implied to be indecent exposure in public.
This was an answer we got pretty late. I believe this was in mini Scribes that we found this out.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely, I think, in the early days of the modern era of DK Vine, or like the post Donkey Kong Country Returns era DK Vine.
There was even a follow-up where, like, somebody asked, well, why did you say Bumper is in jail? And the explanation was, it's probably safer to say Bumper's in jail than Jago's in a mental hospital, or Lupus killed some swans and had to be euthanized. It's simply because Bumper is so far down the list of old Rare characters, in with a chance of a spectacular comeback.
I am still hoping that we're going to get Bumper back. Like, I've always said that if we ever get another Conker game,
he's out on parole.
But yeah, Bumper should be the Diddy Kong Racing character who is incorporated as Conker's Tip Top, i.e. the character who has a supporting NPC role in that franchise.
He's the one I can most see, like, having a leap toward being a little bit risque.
Well, considering, yeah. Considering what's now canon. But yeah, speaking of Diddy Kong Racing, Cameron, this is actually something that a lot of people don't still know, what we're about to bring up, that we actually learned, I think, from Scribes.
So people obviously noticed Tiny Kong looked very different in Diddy Kong Racing DS. And I remember thinking at the time, and I think this was a logical thought, that, well, obviously Rare did this because they needed a heavyweight character to replace Banjo. And I remember in the back of my mind, I was dead certain that this was going to be something that, like, got a logical explanation in the game itself or in the story, like, oh, like Whizpig like shot a spell when it accidentally did this to Tiny, like how Drumstick became a frog.
Whereas I was just thinking that, oh yeah, this is just Rare adding a dose of continuity, like world building into Donkey Kong lore. This is like, even at this late stage, Rare is still continuing to evolve and develop the Donkey Kong lore, and they're having Tiny go through this growth spurt, and they're aging her up just to make her different from Dixie. And it's just Rare being Rare, Rare, the same people who killed off Wrinkly Kong. I was just like, this is great. This is great that they're, still putting their thumb on the scales of Donkey Kong. And it turns out, no. According to, I think it was Scribes, Lee explained that it was Nintendo who was responsible for the Tiny Kong redesign. Told them, this is what she looks like now.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they got really an explanation for it either.
No, but
this is just what she is now.
Yeah, so a lot of people will still credit Rare to Tiny Kong's aging, and no, it was a Nintendo decision. Rare couldn't make those decisions for the Donkey Kong cast at that point in time. They were just making Donkey Kong remakes, essentially, through 2007, and that was their last one, and Nintendo told them, jump, and Rare had to say how high. Or how high do we make Tiny in this case? The skip and a hop.
She can apparently grow in size to suit her mood, too.
Right. So, one of the last, also, curiosities that I still don't know how widespread is known outside of, like, the immediate fan community who read Scribes, was that Rare was meant, at one point, to have far more trophies in Super Smash Bros. Melee than we ended up getting.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's really as much detail as we got on that, but it is just a fascinating thing to think about.
When you look at the representation of Rare's games, because this was Super Smash Bros. Melee, this was still when Rare was partnered with Nintendo, and the only, like, Donkey Kong characters in there as trophies, aside from Donkey Kong and I think, like, Donkey Kong Jr., but we got Dixie Kong, and we got King K. Rool, but Diddy wasn't there?
You've got 1, 3, and 4, and you're missing 2.
Yeah.
In that list.
Yeah, it was just a bizarre, like, lack of representation for Donkey Kong, let alone things like Banjo-Kazooie.
Yeah, and it kind of adds to this other, like, there's already a layer of, like, Rare stuff, like, kind of quasi on the cutting room floor in Melee, because we already had this weirdness where the motion sensor bomb in the Japanese version of Melee is the one from Perfect Dark, not the one from GoldenEye.
Mm-hmm.
And they credit it as being from Perfect Dark. I think they even, like, sloppily edited it out. The European version of Melee launched accidentally name-dropping the Carrington Institute from Perfect Dark.
Right.
And in other releases, so there were 2 Perfect Dark items, the motion sensor bomb and the cloaking device. And in other territories, they changed the motion sensor bomb to the one from GoldenEye, and they obscure the credits for which games they're from with Top Secret.
Yeah.
Which I think is both them being playful and also acknowledging it's a bad idea to name drop GoldenEye.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, Perfect Dark is in the credits under Rare's name in all territories still.
Yeah, it was unusual just how, like, what was it, because of, like, the looming buyout, which at that point was still like a year away. We don't really know, because yeah, there are other things in Melee, like Rare staffers voicing the Star Fox characters.
Or is it even just simply that it was much harder to transfer files back and forth in 2000?
Well, I
2001.
mean, we saw that as recently as Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 3DS and Wii U, where Retro didn't have much in the way of Tropical Freeze representation in the game because there was that lack of communication between this Western studio and Sakurai's team. So it could have been just as simple as that. So, but yeah, we learned that at one point they did have trophies earmarked for rare stuff in Melee.
And as we've learned recently, Rare were in deep enough with Nintendo to get early builds of Ocarina of Time.
Right, yeah, Tim Stamper getting frisky on social media.
I'm just looking over to our chat to see if anybody mentioned anything they specifically remember. And Amazing DJ Dustin mentions, I remember during the iPod era, Rare had MP3s you could download, including the uncensored Soprano from Live and Reloaded.
Oh, that's right, because they censored it, and that was a controversial thing. How dare they censor Soprano in Live and Reloaded, which originally called Live and Uncut, but obviously it wasn't uncut. But you could get the uncensored version on Rare's website. Before we start wrapping things up here, we have to talk about Mr. Pants a little bit more, Cameron, because Mr. Pants is probably the greatest success story of Rare's website. The last 25 years, the biggest star to come out of it is undeniably Mr. Pants. Now, Mr. Pants, of course, is most well known for starring in It's Mr. Pants, the puzzle game for the Game Boy Advance that was once Donkey Kong Coconut Crackers before evolving into its final state. But Mr. Pants has shown up or been alluded to throughout Rare games as early as 1999. Just 1 year after debuting on Rare's website.
Yeah, this is a really oddly quick turnaround for this character, I think.
Right.
In a way that I think would be very confusing to anybody not in on the bit.
Right. Now, at first, like, it wasn't Mr. Pants just appearing as a character. He showed up as sort of a jokey cheat in Jet Force Gemini. I know there's Mr. Pants graffiti in the game, but the thing that's most widely cited is the Ants as Pants cheat.
Mostly cited in that people would bring it up to you trying to make it's Mr. Pants. Make Mr. Pants DKU before his time. No, wait, make Jet Force DKU. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they're trying to make Jet Force Gemini DKU, even though they don't realize that this would then invalidate Mr. Pants DKU status. But yeah, the Ants as Pants cheat would basically reskin the ant baddies in Jet Force Gemini as weird polygonal Mr. Pants representations. I still think it's like the most bizarre depiction of Mr. Pants that we've seen, because usually, they retain just the very crude hand-drawn style of the survey page on Rareware, and this was not that. It's
flirting with danger to render him in 3D.
Yeah, definitely. You can see why they didn't do it after this. But Jet Force Gemini was the first sort of time a game acknowledged this character on Rare's website, but it was Banjo-Tooie where he really came alive, and I mean that in as literal a sense as you can in a video game, because Mr. Pants showed up as a plausibly real character on Boggy's television screen in Banjo-Tooie, as well as appearing as a constellation in the Dodgem Dome in Witchy World. But yeah, Mr. Pants was dancing on Boggy's TV, and because he was also included in the as a character in the credits, it was because each staffer had a Banjo-Tooie character put as their sort of middle name. So, you would get like Greg Blank Males or whatever, but it would be Lee Mr. Pants Loveday. And that would be our clue that this character dancing on Boggy's TV was a real guy. And so we hold that Banjo-Tooie is his first canonical appearance as a video game character. ergo making Mr. Pants natively DKU, which would become important later on when he would get his own game. I think that the most frequent appearance of Mr. Pants as a Easter egg, as a reference, was Grabbed by the Ghoulies, though, because he's all over Grabbed by the Ghoulies.
He's all over Grabbed by the Ghoulies, and just in a very unobscured way, because it's just literally his character art everywhere.
Yeah, just strewn about the mansion. I don't even really know why.
I mean, it's a mark of the Baron's insanity that he also, like many of us, just filled his home with a bunch of rare shit.
Yeah, right. There are references to so much in Grabbed by the Ghoulies, up to and including veiled Donkey Kong references. But yeah, Mr. Pants is just everywhere. So Perfect Dark Zero is a game I am not intimately familiar with, but he does appear in that as a bot name, right?
Yeah, I only know this through Steve because I have not spent a lot of time with Perfect Dark Zero's multiplayer. But Mr. Pants is one of the bot names, and so are several members of the extended Mr. Pants cast that has cropped up over the years, like
so,
Toby.
Toby, yeah.
And Mrs. Pie.
Mrs. Pie, his mistress, who he sired Toby with. Not to be confused with Mr. Pie, Mrs. Pie's husband, who is not the father of Toby.
Like I said, we could do an entire episode on Mr. Pants.
And we will. We will. Don't worry. Eventually, we will do the character witness for Mr. Pants. Viva Pinata, he was referenced quite a bit in Viva Pinata.
Yeah, there is an item in Viva Pinata, and by extension Trouble in Paradise, that is his bowler hat.
Yeah.
Or rather, a mass-produced version of it explicitly.
Right. Everybody wants to dress like Mr. Pants. He's a fashion icon.
He appears in Nuts and Bolts in a couple different ways. One is, I love this idea for him. There's a Mr. Pants hood ornament, like you would find on like a Rolls Royce or like other kind of fancy car, but it's just Mr. Pants with his arms back, facing forward.
Yeah.
Along with an Xbox disc of It's Mr. Pants in Logbox 720.
It's a shame they never ported it.
Oh, Mr. Pants, It's Mr. Pants could have such a life on like digital storefronts or phones if it was just given another chance to find more of an audience.
I completely agree. It's such a good puzzle game. It's the only puzzle game I've ever played to completion. I love it, and its mobile version. I've played its mobile version, people.
And I remember like all the discs and Nuts and Bolts would have, if you paid attention to where the copyright information would be on a real Xbox disc, it would have some sort of like little gag, usually pretty self-deprecating. As was the style of Nuts and Bolts.
Right.
Inside and Out.
I've likened Nuts and Bolts to kind of a jazz funeral for Rare as we knew it, because there was a lot of gallows humor in Nuts and Bolts. Like, this is it. We're not going to get another game after this. This is the end of the road for all of us. Which obviously wasn't the case ultimately, but it felt like it at the time for sure. Yeah,
the joke on the Mr. Pants disc was about like the Rare website mascot got his own video game. It's highly unlikely he'll get another. I'm paraphrasing there, but
right. No, it sounds pretty accurate.
Here, Steve just gave me the exact quote. Thank you, Rare Gamer. Our website mascot that somehow managed to get his own game. It's highly doubtful he'll get another.
Yeah,
it's even more pithy than I thought it was.
And did he show up anywhere in Rare Replay?
He did, in like a very secretive sort of way. So there's a featurette on Rare Replay where they highlight some of the people who have done voices in Rare games over the years, like having Steve Malpass show up for a little bit and make Mr. Ribs noises.
Uh-huh.
And there is a kind of secret tag at the end of the video, because it's after like the logo is shown up and you're expecting the video is just going to end and put you back to the menu. Instead, it highlights Mr. Pants.
Considering, It's Mr. Pants would have been perfect for Rare Replay, but they didn't have any of the handheld games in there. It's nice that they found a way to get them in. And of course, they did do a video feature on It's Mr. Pants on their YouTube channel in the style of the Rare Replay documentaries after the fact. But, yeah.
It's how we found out John Silk did his voice, aka General Scales.
Yeah, when we always thought Shabunga and Mr. Pants had the same voice actor. Not true. Not true.
And of course, he got his own game.
Yeah, right. All right, Cameron. We do have 2 calls to take for this episode. Spoiler alert, they're both from the same caller. So we'll play them back to back, and then we'll give our final thoughts, for now at least, on Rareware, the website, and the legacy it has left, aside from, Mr. Pants.
Hey, DK Vine, it's Steve from Rare Gamer. So I'm really happy that you're doing a kind of commemorative anniversary episode on Rareware.com, because I think for a lot of us, especially with like fan sites, we used and stole so much from that site for like the humor that we use, for like the features that we have on our own website, even stuff to navigation. Because it was so inspiring back in the day to go on to Rareware and be like, oh my God, the writing is brilliant. The screenshots are here. The videos are there. We can like watch this. We can do this. We can interact this way. All the rumor mill stuff, all the Scribes, all the Tepid Seats. We wasted hours on that website, and every single second was worth it, So just to see us kind of acknowledging it, going like, wow, it's 25 years ago, just looking back, it's extremely nostalgic. And I'm sure that many people calling in are gonna share those nostalgic memories, and they're well warranted. I mean, Lee Loveday, genius. You know what I mean? Like, he should be held up in a lot higher regard in terms of like the writing style and stuff that he did, because we're all shamelessly copying him at every step, just trying to like almost echo his voice to do, our own kind of witty responses to things like that. But I think the thing I'm going to focus on, just to make me a little different and to kind of, show my own history on what I took away from Rareware, is a bygone era of secret web pages. Specifically the super secret bovine bonus. And I know for a lot of people that kind of grew up with the social media age, secret websites are totally a thing or secret pages on websites, total thing of the past. Nobody does them anymore. And it could be like security stuff or just a general lack of creativity, but you would have a website that just had a page that could not be found through traditional means. You couldn't Google it. You couldn't go through any searches like that. You just had like a pixel on a page that was hidden. And by going to that page and clicking on it, it would redirect you to a secret page that would announce, hey, you found it, you've invested enough time, you've done something really secret. There was actually a website called David Wan's Unique Video Game Glitches, and I know I'm aging myself by bringing that up, but it was a cool website that it showed off different ways that you could do video game glitches way back in the 90s and early 2000s. And he had another secret page on his website that you could click through, and like he almost held a sort of contest for it, where he's like, hey, if you can find the page, I'll add you to like the name at the top of my site. And it just made that kind of engagement a little more interesting when you were just viewing it after school, going, oh, I'm going to find the secret page today. I'm going to really look for it. I'm going to try and find it. So Lee Loveday did something similar with Rareware, with a page that couldn't be found, but he used that page as a way to hold contests. So if you're dedicated enough and invested enough in Rareware to find the page, you would have the option to earn some really cool Rare swag. And that popped up in a lot of different iterations of the Rare site, whether it was, secret little Banjo-Tooie, yellow shorts you could get from like solving a... Hey, DK Vine, it's Steve from Rare Gamer with a second attempt at this message because I prattled on way too long last time. When you get dorks like us talking about this stuff, we can go for hours. So anyway, I'll cut to the chase. Rareware used to have a website or a page on their website called the Super Secret Bovine Bonus. It was a hidden website. I'll leave out how you get to it. Maybe you want to discuss that on the show. But by clicking on it, you get to a secret contest page that would allow you to win Rare swag by like emailing Lee and answering a very specific question. But the idea that you can go through the website and find this hidden feature that not everybody could find, and the fact that it's preserved now on the Wayback Machine. So if anybody's interested in discovering it today, you can totally go through the Wayback Machine and find it for yourself. I'll give you a hint. Killer Instinct Gold. That's all I'm going to say. which is probably too much anyway. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that. Rareware, the fact that it's 25 years old now is amazing. I can't believe as much time has gone by as it has. I remember dialing up. I remember connecting. I'm old as hell, as we all are. But yeah, it's part of Rare fandom that I hope doesn't ever be forgotten. It was fantastic. Good way to waste teenage years, adult years, everything. Thanks for doing this episode. It's fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you for the call, Steve, from off of Rare Gamer, who we've already mentioned quite a few times. You are the Sean Williamson of this podcast.
Leave it to Steve to bring up a rare cow that I had completely neglected to mention.
Yeah. And, people don't really do this whole, secret page stuff anymore. Like, for example, finding the missing episode of The Kongversation Season 6. Somewhere out there is an episode of The Kongversation that nobody outside of the staff and our friends have heard. Where could it be? How can you find it? To find out...
I'm starting to realize why people don't do this anymore.
Search for the clues throughout The Kongversation 6th season. Each episode contains a piece of the puzzle. If you can figure it out, it will lead you to where the episode is hidden. Be the first to @ us on Twitter or whatever replaces Twitter in the future with where the episode is at, and you can win fabulous prizes like listening to the episode first and an autographed copy of Sea of Thieves #1. Where is the missing episode of The Kongversation? It's up to you to find out. Cameron?
Yeah, I'll just let people... Should I just tell people how to get to the bovine bonus page? Because I don't think...
At this point, the Wayback Machine is being litigated in court. Who knows how much longer it will be up? So maybe we just tell people how to do it before it's gone forever.
So, as we sort of touched on when I mentioned the Simon minigame, Rare did hold a bunch of contests on their website where you could win stuff. It's even how we have that Banjo-Tooie character collage on our site because Chad won a Banjo-Tooie contest and scanned it in.
Uh-huh.
Okay, this is extremely funny. I had to refresh my memory how to find the bovine bonus page, or honestly, maybe just find out for the first time, because I sure don't remember getting to it.
Yeah.
And it's a forum post on Rare Witch Project describing that you get to it by way of going to the Killer Instinct Gold page on Rareware, clicking the golden dot in the navigation bar between Recent and Affairs, and you will reach the secret bovine bonus page. And the poster of that post is Laraco, the username of Steve from Rare Gamer.
Yeah.
You played yourself, Steve. I'm sorry.
He's been obsessed with this for a long, long time.
And yeah, it's a secret page with a photo of a cow with a speech bubble saying, "Well, hey." And describing, yes, you've made it. It was going to be in Blastcore, but a combination of deadlines and limited storage and the lead artist refusing to draw some cows soon nipped that idea in the bud. So now it's here and it's great. The official Rareware super secret bovine bonus.
Of course, rare cows would become a reoccurring thing by the handheld team then, starting with Donkey Kong. Was it Donkey Kong Country for the Game Boy Color? Or was it...
I think Pocket Tales might have been the first one, because
Pocket Tales, yes.
In that one, the cow was meant to be a real representation of a cow.
Right. And then after that, it started getting a little bit more abstract, right? Well, Cameron, it's time to wrap things up because we have gone on far longer than I anticipated we would about this damned website.
I couldn't be brief enough to write into Scribes.
Which is weird because Rareware is mostly known for its briefs.
I guess to give my kind of final thoughts on just the totality of Rare's web presence. I related this on the buyout episode, and I touched on it earlier, but I feel like I have to single-handedly credit Rare's web presence and its unique voice for why I am still a Rare fan and stayed a Rare fan after 2002. As I said, I hitched my wagon to the GameCube. I wasn't able to play a lot of their console output for a good few years, and I mean, you'll remember it well, Hyle. We've talked about it before. The mid 2000s was not a pleasant time to be online, and that was felt especially if you were a fan of Rare. It was a very cynical, caustic time. It was that wasn't a good time to also amid a lot of like toxic like console fanboy warring and a lot of just inclination to poke bears for this massive shake-up buyout to have happened, with a lot of manufactured narratives kind of becoming the public consensus, where the relationships between video game companies were treated like soap opera dramas, and companies themselves were kind of treated as monoliths onto themselves, like not really on an individual, not reflective of the individuals that made them up.
Uh-huh.
And this is how you get the flying accusation that, oh, some people left Rare to form Free Radical. I guess all the good people left.
Right.
But this detached, self-deprecating, sarcastic, yet paradoxically reverent voice on Rare's website, and just its myriad of trivia, funny commentary, comprehensive write-ups, and pretty artwork with silly jokes buried underneath it. It gave me a really nice way to stay engaged with Rare beyond just playing their games. And importantly, it was this massively humanizing element for the studio, and I think it gave me, in my early teens, a lot more perspective on the reality of the world, and not as it existed in the minds of 14-year-olds on forums.
Sure.
And just showing this engagement that proved that people there in the trenches at a company could engage with their audience in a way that didn't feel extremely calculated, but just very, very honest.
Yeah.
And charming.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you just said. And, you know, Rareware, the website, it is sadly gone. It is, you know, evolved into something else, as we had said, but it's not something I really actively mourn either. Like, not like I saw the Donkey Kong Racing trailer and I will forever mourn not getting that game. Partially because it was a drawn-out process. It wasn't like this sudden shock of the buyout where all of a sudden, hey, you're not getting Donkey Kong Racing. There was a slow death by 1,000 cuts that intertwined with
boiled Winky.
Yeah. It was just the reality of the independent video game studio Rare being purchased by a major corporation, and the way the internet evolved over the course of 25 years. And this is not me blaming Microsoft either, because what corporation is going to want to spend the time and resources on a website with such a unique voice in this day and age? Not when there are bigger fish to fry, bigger ways to reach the public. I mean, even DK Vine, it's not just a website anymore. We're a podcast, we're a Twitch channel, YouTube, social media. I mean, we're not just confined to the website. So I get it. It's just a shame because at its strongest, as we've said, Rareware the site was a repository of history on the studio, and it was a thrilling examination of what was new and a saucy little preview of what was to come. It was a place for fans of the studio to become fanatics, and it was done by not talking down to them. That's my biggest thing. That was my biggest thing as a kid, right? You're talking down to me. I said not to buy Dr. Seuss for the graduates. That's because I always felt like Dr. Seuss was patronizing. It was treating me like I was just a kid. Lee Loveday, for as bright and esoteric as he could get, never really talked down to you. He always just joked with you, like you were on his level. And that always just stuck with me. His irreverent, dryly sarcastic voice was also just ahead of its time. I would say by a good 20 years. Long before the rise of the wacky brand managers on social media, you had Lee Loveday doing that for Rare, pioneering that voice. And how important was Lee in shaping our fandom and making that impression on us? So throughout the darkest days of that post nuts and bolts pre-Rare Replay era of Rare, I often remarked that as long as Lee was still at Rare, I would still believe in Rare as a studio. Yeah, I would put Lee Loveday over people like Greg Mayles at the time, because that's how much Lee Loveday and his writing meant to me as a fan of not only him, but of Rare itself. And, Greg Mayles is one of the main driving forces behind most of my favorite games. So I think that just speaks to how powerful Lee Loveday's words were to a young Hyle Russell and to everyone else at DK Vine and everyone in the Rare fan community who were around during that era or a little bit after that era. And maybe it's just because game development is something I've never had a personal interest in as something I wanted to pursue. But writing about games, writing for games even, yeah, that's something I understood and kind of had a drive to pursue. So I think that's why he always just stood out. And while Lee has been active on Twitter, he's kind of a famous recluse. I know Ben and Chad would often correspond with him, like off Scribes. But I always felt awkward about pestering him. Or any Rare staff, really. Because, I don't know, maybe that's my social anxiety, but from my point of view, I just didn't want to bother any of these people I really respected.
Oh, no, I totally understand. It's one of my biggest, debilitating mental hang-ups where I feel like one of the worst things I can do is be a bother to someone.
Yes, exactly. And part of that was my mom scolding me as a child for being in people's way. Like in the grocery store. Oh, I'm sorry he's in your way. And she would pull on my arm and move me. And I think that gave me some sort of complex in my life where now when I'm in a grocery store, I have a panic attack. Thanks, Mom. You're not getting a Mother's Day card this year. So yeah, I always just kept a respectful distance, at least in my head, what was respectful. Only using, the built-in avenue of Scribes as my way of, indulging that. And that being said, I actually got to meet him in May 2016 when I had the privilege of visiting Rare. And you think that would be surreal, that would be this, life-altering moment to finally meet him, but it was actually perfectly casual. We were just hanging out in a pub and in walks Lee Loveday through the door and I'm like, oh, it's Lee Loveday. And he was actually very just normal to talk to and it wasn't weird at all. And we sat next to each other in an Italian restaurant and, it was just wonderful getting to talk to him. And I will always cherish that memory because how often do you get to meet your heroes and how often does it go well, So the fact that Lee never, went out to E3 or did any of that and I still got the chance to spend a little bit of time with him Like my personal writing hero. Just I can't be I'm getting misty eyed just talking about it because it just hits me like how fortunate I was. But you know, the spirit of Rareware still stays within sight of us, and that's partially why I don't mourn it, because I feel like I sort of carry that flame around inside of me, as I know you do as well, Cameron, as I know Steve does.
All of us consciously or not are just so inseparably influenced by this website.
Right. It does really make me want, discussing all of this, it really makes me want to clean up DK Vine's back pages a little bit. I wish I had the time to do so, because I really want to create a valuable resource, much in the same way that Rareware, the site, used to be.
Patreon.
Yes, Patreon. Oh, what would give me the time to finally do that? Patreon. And yeah, like, it really just makes me want to, like, make DK Vine a more kick-ass site. Just still chasing Lee's shadow 25 years later. I mean, ultimately, that's all my life's going to amount to, is trying to be as good as this website that I read back in 1998. But Cameron and I do have a confession to make. The first time I'm publicly making this confession. So a few months ago, I was reflecting on this year being the 25th anniversary of Rareware, the site. And I don't know, I was getting wistful, I was getting nostalgic, as I often do. Not because of the passage of time, but because, Lee Loveday's legacy, I don't want it to be forgotten. And obviously we will never forget it. DK Vine will never forget it. But it has been an entire human generation since he launched Rareware, the website. And, I don't want it to be forgotten. I don't want it to be forgotten and disregarded when it comes to the history of Rare, the annals of Rare history. I want this to be just as cherished as some of their games. So a light bulb went off in my head, not too dissimilar from Mr. Pants' robotic sidekick Helpo, as seen in It's Mr. Pants. Because I knew that for several years, Microsoft still owned the URL rareware.com with the H. Rareware, WARE.com, obviously redirects to rare.co.uk still. Rareware, WHERE.com, did for the longest time, at least through the Kinect Sports era. If the powers that be cared so little for that, I was wondering, and I checked, and they had let it lapse, Cameron. So I bought it. That's right. I now own Rareware.com. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Right now, it just redirects to DK Vine. But, if Microsoft or the higher-ups at Rare don't want it, I couldn't, in good conscience, ever let it fall into anybody else's hands. Like, it means too much. So, ideally, I would at some point like to set up a tribute page to Lee's work on DK Vine and have it redirect to there. But at least for now, it's safe. In honor of that and this episode, I have created a new rotating slogan on dkvine.com or rareware.com if you wish. So now, whenever you go to our website, there is a randomized chance you will be greeted with the message, "Thank you for your interest in Rare."
This has been a File 2 production.
¡Qué rico!